We will bring the assembly meeting to order for August 1st. Ms. Glaszewski, will you lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Mr. Smith, would you do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, we would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Ganesh Chish.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just looking to see if we had our last assembly member joining us electronically. She has not. So, Mr. Bryson,
Present.
Ms. Hill.
Here.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Stream.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Walahidak is not yet joined us. Ms. Gladaszewski
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So special order of business. Our first special order of business is recognizing the first Juneau-based Ukrainian refugees. So as we all know, the world faces a tragedy in this time due to the unprovoked and unjustified attack on the sovereign nation in Ukraine. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Irina and Yvonne, and I apologize for this, Iroshenko, pretty close, to Juneau. They are our first Ukrainian refugees and were brought to Juneau as part of the work of a sponsor circle of local neighbors. So we welcome you. And if you come up and shake all of our hands, we have a couple welcoming gifts for you, a pool pass and bus passes. So it was like, you have to come speak into a mic, so I'll just hand you my mic. Sorry.
Yeah, my mom would have this here. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Turn around and face the audience.
Ah.
They don't want to see us.
Thank you for your warm welcome of Juneau. This beautiful place is like a fairy tale with the ocean and the high mountains. What is happening now in my country cannot be put into words. There we have our family and our hearts are with them. Every morning we start with a call on Ukraine. I hope we found our new home here and life without fear. Thank you for all of your support and understanding.
Our other special order of business tonight is instruction for public participation. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is the time when, for those who are on Zoom, if you have signed up in advance, when it comes time to participate, be sure and raise your virtual hand. For those who happen to be watching on YouTube live, if you wanted to participate via Zoom, the link is at the top of the agenda at juno.org, or you can call in, and the phone number to call is 1-253-215-8782 and enter webinar number 915-1542-4903. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, we'll go to our minutes. Approval of minutes. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve the June 13th regular Assembly meeting and the June 14th, June 15th, and June 27th special Assembly meeting minutes, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, those minutes are approved. Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Manager, is there any request for agenda changes?
No agenda changes. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to public participation on non-agenda items. We have several members speaking on non-agenda items. We'll start with Mr. Shaw.
Madam Mayor, I just want to note that we have been joined by Walahi.com.
All right, so noted. Mr. Shaw, if you touch the button, it will turn green and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 months ago, I was in haranguing you about the gondola at Eagle Crest. Subsequently, I had a long discussion with the manager of Eagle Crest. Where I want to put it, there is not room at the bottom. Eagle Crest was not laid out to start with that in mind. In fact, it wasn't laid out at all. It was just sort of helter-skelter, things dropped. A master plan wasn't put in effect until several years after Eagle Crest started. So what you see is sort of here, there. So that's where things stand. And it's going to be tough getting it where he wants to put it because of that, because it was not planned. It just happened. And so there we are. The other item I wanted to bring you up to speed on is Tulsaquah. You should be aware between mid-1930s and mid-1950s, Juneau did extremely well financially off the Tulsaquah. The original claims were held by people in Douglas. Alaska Coastal brought in a special plane to fly material into there, which meant that they had people, who were making money. Then there was I believe it was the Reichels who had the barge system up the river. And the Baranoff Hotel did very well. 1948, going out to the university, I bought $100 Canadian for $80 American. That was Tulsaquah money. And I merely tell you that because I realize there's problems, but on the other hand, there was lots of money made in Juneau, lots, big piles. And that's sort of lost in all of the whatever. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions?
No, do you want to state your name and area you're chatting?
Albert Shaw.
Record though.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Any questions for Mr. Shaw? Ms. Train.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a thanks for the follow-up. You promised to go talk to the Eagle Crest manager and you did, and I appreciate your report back.
Yes, we appreciate you doing your homework. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next we have Mr. Yucatel.
Carl Yucatel, Blueberry Hills Road. Good evening, Mayor and Assembly members. Tonight, I'm here on behalf of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and I'm a past section president, which is a state position. I just wanted to cordially invite the Assembly to attend an event that's happening on September 10th. I'll follow it up with an email, but on September 10th, the American Society of Civil Engineers will be dedicating the Salmon Creek Dam as a American Society of Civil Engineers National Historic Landmark. This will be the third National Historic Landmark in Alaska. The first two are the Alcan or the Alaska Highway and White Pass. So Salmon Creek Dam is the first constant angle variable radius dam that was constructed in the United States. It was constructed in 1912 to 1914. The genesis of getting this on the historic landmark, the credit really goes back to Scott Willis, who was an engineer with ALP, who passed away about 6 years ago. And we're going to have quite a few people from around the country here to dedicate that. And I just wanted to give a cordial invite to the assembly. And I think Mayor has already RSVP'd, but if you have time, we'll have the actual event up at the Gino Douglas Museum. There's actually a display up there right now with the Salmon Creek Dam, and there's also other events that we will be honoring. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Yucatel. Any questions for Mr. Yucatel? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. All right, so that's all I see for non-agenda items unless someone snuck in the room without being able to sign up. Seeing no hands, we will move onward. All right, would you step up to the mic and please state your name and area of town you live in? And this is for non-agenda items. Okay, and just push the button. There you go.
Adam Leon. I am just here on behalf and Mayor and Assembly members of Shoshana Gungerstein, who's running for the U.S. Senate. And she just wanted to, she's based in Juneau, and we just wanted to be here and represent that there is somebody from Southeast, representing Southeast on the state level for the U.S. Senate. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Any other hands that I missed? Seeing none, we will move on to our consent agenda. Are there any public requests for consent agenda changes other than ordinances for introduction? Are there any assembly requests for consent agenda changes? Without, we'll move to assembly action. Ms. Gladaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move the consent agenda and I would ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. So that will bring us to public hearing. Item A, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-34, an ordinance providing for the levy and collection of a temporary 1% area-wide sales tax on the sale price of retail sales, rentals, and services performed within the city and borough of Juneau to be effective October 1st, 2023, and providing for a ballot question ratifying the levy.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would place the question of extending the 1% temporary sales tax on the October 4, 2022 regular municipal election ballot. Current 1% temporary sales tax expires on September 30, 2023. If approved, the temporary 1% tax would be extended for 5 years until September 30, 2028. If extended, the temporary tax is estimated to generate a total of $60.2 million in sales tax revenue. The Assembly has designated funds to the following project areas: deferred maintenance of CVJ and Juneau School District facilities, replacement of public safety equipment for JPD and CCFR, redevelopment of Gastineau Avenue, Telephone Hill, and the North State Office Building parking garage, affordable housing initiatives, including further development of Peterson Hill, harbor expansion and maintenance, childcare support, Lemon Creek multimodal path, relocation of City Museum, contribution to the restricted budget reserve, and information technology upgrades. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And I don't see anybody signed up to testify of the 1%. Did I miss anybody in the room? Seeing none, we will bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt.
Excuse me, Mr. Bryson. Sorry. I do have somebody that signed up online and he just popped his hand up. So give us 1 minute. Madam Clerk, will you bring over Mr. Spratt?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Spratt, you should be unmuted and available to speak.
Thank you, and sorry for the late chime in. My name is Aaron Spratt. I live in the Valley. You know, I oppose any extension of taxes, and I would just ask the Assembly to be cognizant of the imaging that you're putting out there. So we're going to raise, you know, 60.2 million in sales revenue tax with 1%. And the first item listed is deferred maintenance on CBJ and JSD facilities. And I would remind the public that the next item, the next item is to allocate $35 million for a new city hall. And we're putting these temporary / permanent 1% sales taxes that just keep going on and on to fund maintenance and to take care of properties I kind of take that back, that you aren't providing maintenance for. And what makes the public think that you're going to allocate any of this money appropriately? And all of these items are great ideas. I mean, but in light of the economy and inflation, I stand strongly against the continuation of any tax. And I just ask for less government, keep the money in the hands of the people. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spratt. Any questions for Mr. Spratt? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. All right, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Move the Assembly adopt Ordinance 2022-34, an ordinance providing for the levy and collection of a temporary 1% area sales tax as written in our agenda. And I move for unanimous consent.
Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just object for the purpose of one comment. We got some various comments about some of these items. I just wanted to say that most of these things will come back to the Assembly for specific appropriations. Specifically, people asked about harbor expansion and whether we were doing a new big project at North Douglas. And that's not on the list here, but it's just for all of the projects will go through the proper channels and go before the Assembly. So I just remove my objection.
Thank you, Ms. Gladysevsky. Any further objection? Seeing none, that motion is passed. Item B, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-37, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in the principal amount of not to exceed $35 million to finance construction and equipping of a new city hall for the city and borough, and submitting a proposition to the voters at the election to be held therein on October 4th, 2022.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would send a bond package to the voters to consider in the municipal election on October 4, 2022. This ordinance would send one general obligation bond proposition of up to $35 million for the construction and equipment of a new city hall. Total project cost with underground parking is currently estimated at $41.3 million, and the Assembly has already appropriated $6.3 million of general funds. New City Hall would be built on Whittier Avenue across the street from the State Museum. A new facility would have a number of positive attributes for the city and our citizens, including the following: an end to office space rent payments in excess of $800,000 annually, the freeing up of historical apartment spaces, the ability for customers and employees to do municipal business in a more efficient manner, as CBJ offices would be located in one place instead of 5 different locations. Additionally, a new structure would be more economical to maintain. The existing City Hall is one of our most expensive municipal buildings to maintain. Committee of the Whole selected 450 Whittier Avenue as a preferred site for the new City Hall during the April 11, 2022 meeting. Assembly requested staff draft an ordinance to submit a proposition to the voters on the October 4, 2022 election ballot during the June 6, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We do have some people testifying on this one also. We'll start with Mr. Steedle.
Mr. Steedle, you should be able to speak at this time.
You're still on mute. There you go. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. Mayor and Assembly, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. My name is Rob Steedle, and I live at 502 West 10th Street. As a former CBJ employee, I have the perspective of someone who spent 25 years working in City Hall and in the other office space CBJ rents downtown. I know firsthand the inefficiencies that those inadequate spaces create. The idea of constructing a modern, purpose-built City Hall is by no means a new one, and I have long known that CBJ would do well to upgrade its facilities. I also think that this is not the time to do so for 3 reasons. First, clearly the pandemic disrupted the way we do business. We may never fully return to the office environments of the past. Good has come from this. We've learned to effectively deliver services by integrating teleworking technologies. We are also continuing to learn to create work-life flexibility to accommodate the needs of millennials and younger generations. We haven't seen such a profound shift in the workplace in our lifetimes, and that shift isn't over. There are still many unknowns. Here's just one example. In her memo for the June 6th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting, Engineering Director Katie Kester addressed one aspect of the City Hall project, the Rubik's Cube of downtown parking. She wrote, "It's difficult to understand a complete picture of the future parking needs of the area after 2 years of COVID and teleworking." I can certainly appreciate that, and it makes me wonder how we develop a complete picture of all the requirements for a city hall in this time of rapid change. What we build today may not be what we wish we'd built tomorrow. Secondly, the time is not ripe for a major new construction project. This is a time of rapidly rising materials costs, material shortages, increasing transportation costs, and soaring interest rates. In her memo,
Mr. Steedle, you're out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Steedle? Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Steedle. They are thought-provoking. If the time now is not right, and I know you have a lot of experience with this, when do you think the time would be right? What would your suggestion be?
I think we need a little more clarity about the office requirements of the future, but more importantly, I think that this is a diversion from a more pressing problem that's at the top of the Assembly goals, which is housing. I don't know why we're investing in office space when we know housing is our most central problem. Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Steedle? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. All right, next we have David Ignell. Please push the button and state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Assembly members. My name is David Ignell and I live in West Juneau. I guess what I can't fathom is why the city would consider spending $35 million on office space when there's infrastructure within the city that needs to be addressed. Specifically, I'm talking about storm drains. My house, the property is being eroded by upstream erosion or upstream water, which has been diverted. This has been a problem which has been building for many years. As properties in West Juneau and Douglas are developed on the upside of the road, all that water gets, and as wetlands are built upon, all that water gets directed, and unfortunately it's coming out at my house and eroding the property. And my understanding is that there's other property owners that this is happening as well. So, I think we need to take care of these infrastructure problems before we start building new office space, as the previous gentleman said. In looking at this, I noted that this evening for the first time that it says there'd be an end of office space rent payments in excess of $800,000 annually. I have a background in commercial real estate, and I'm just wondering how much of that 800,000 is attributable to triple nets expenses such as utilities, taxes, and other things. Perhaps the number is far less than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Acknell? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Acknell, have you spoken, just trying to think about addressing the storm drain issue. Have you spoke with Public Works and others in the city about trying to find?
Yes, a number of individuals.
Okay. Maybe I'll follow up with Ms. Kester or something about that, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Any further comment on the new city hall? Seeing none, we will move it to the assembly. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022-37, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to object. I actually agree with a lot of things Mr. Steele said. I agree the city should be looking at what it can do with all its offices and consolidating. But I don't think this is the time to put this on the ballot. There is a lot of movement in office space right now in this community. My office, the building where I work, half the people aren't in the office anymore. It's going to take some time for that to shake out. So it's not going to be immediate. And I understand this building here, City Hall, needs some work. So it's not going to be immediate, but in the next few years, there's going to be a lot of shifting of office space. So this is not I just don't think it's the time to build, ask people to vote to build an office building. There are possibly other buildings to be used eventually. Again, our school buildings, this building that we're in right now used to be a fire hall. So it was repurposed and we've been reusing it for years and years. So it's possible that will also be usable. I don't think this is the time, given all the, the expensive costs to be building a new city hall. So I'll be a no vote on this one.
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep it short because it's very similar thinking to Ms. Glaszewski and others. And it's just really more of a timing issue for me. I think we can see in the manager's report that there are some merits for a new city hall. We are a city and hopefully will be here in perpetuity. So I think having a good building for our city government, for the public to access services is critical. I just don't think this is the right time.
Thank you,
And I
Mr.
did have my microphone.
Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Dream. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As the Chair of Public Works, this has been something that Public Works and we've been working on at the COW and having discussions for probably a couple of years now that we've been trying to fine tune and figure out the best solution to move forward with City Hall. I've stated before that I believe that the situation we have now where we're renting space and we have an inadequate building is probably the worst thing that we're doing in city. The $800,000, it's closer to 900, be $1 million within a few years of rent escalations. Using taxpayer money to pay rent should be criminal. We get 24 apartments back. So this actually does move housing in the right direction. And here's the most critical thing that won me over wholeheartedly. The not do anything option costs more over the next 30 years. So if we do this right, in the next 30 years, we'll have a 100-year building that only has 30 years used out of it. We'll have the mortgage paid off. My children, my children's children will have an appropriate city hall that can house all of the functions of the city, and we won't be paying rent. Not doing something means that we're looking at $12 to $18 million in this building in the next 4 years. Unavoidable. We can't even paint the building without massive renovations to this building. We've looked at it. What can we do to temporarily fix this to buy ourselves more time? And we can't. That's just not one of the options. So we fast forward 30 years, we're about $45 million after paying rent and renovating an inadequate building. And we still will only own an inadequate building and will have paid more money than if we buy City Hall and build it purposefully and correctly. I looked at every single location that could be possible, and we took phone calls from building owners, and we've looked at this. We went down this path, and hands down, the most economical way to solve the City Hall issue was to build it purpose-built from the start. That's how we get the best product that, while it does spend a little bit of money up front, it provides the greatest benefit to the most Juneauites throughout the longest period of time. And that's the best thing that we can do for our city. So I've been in support of this from the beginning. I'll be in support of it now. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will also speak in support of this ordinance. I agree with much of what Mr. Bryson said, and I want to thank Mr. Bryson chairing the Public Works Committee and Director Kester for the immense amount of work that they have put into this over the last couple of years, because we really have explored every single option. The two main reasons that I support this support this ordinance are that the current building that we're in needs an immense amount of maintenance, and it's very expensive. It's not like we would be spending no money if we did nothing. I think it would be at least half the price of a new city hall, and it would get us a fraction of the time if we stayed in the current building. The other one that I think is important is that given our current debt load as a city, this is a good time to issue bonds because it's not going to raise people's taxes. So I think now is actually a great time. But it's not, it's not a politically popular issue, and I understand that, and I support it anyway. And I think a yes vote on this ordinance will just mean that voters get to have their say in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stream. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I ask a question of Mr. Manager, please, related to this? Mr. Manager, I thought that Mr. Steedle did raise some interesting points. And one question that I have of you is, if this bond passes for the new city hall, at what point then would we go into design? And the question is really getting at, would we be able to incorporate some of the work changes that have occurred during the pandemic with more people working from home, or are we going to be stuck into a set pattern of so many cubicles and so many floors? Thank you.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So at this point, we only have a conceptual building design, and if approved by the voters, we would fully flesh that out. We are actively having discussions about how to accommodate more flexible workplace conditions and trying to envision the future workforce and what kinds of employers they're going to be interested in working for. So I think we have a long ways to go in the details. I think we would be thinking about a degree of flexibility in the building and anticipating that some teleworking is certainly part of our future. But we really believe that a centralized workplace would be much more efficient for the city and our customers.
Go ahead, Mr. Hale. Sorry, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Manager. I just want to put on the record that I understand people's concerns, but I have also thought long and hard about this, and I'm very much in support of this ordinance moving forward and in support of a new city hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Any further comment before we go to a vote? All right, I get to say the last words very well. But Ms. Treem and Mr. Bryson made most of my points, but I will be a yes vote too. I think we have talked about this quite a lot, and I think the staff has made a very good business case for why we need a new city hall, and Mr. Bryson and Ms. Treem already said that. And I think the timing is right. As Ms. Treem said, as our debt service goes down, we can put this in our debt service and not raise property taxes because of it. So That'll be a yes vote. So Madam Clerk, we have objection. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Ms. Hughes Scandies in, this is the vote on ordinance 2022-37. How would you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Treem,
Yes.
Ms. Wall,
Yes.
Walahida.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Gladysevsky
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item C, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-38. An ordinance authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in the principal amount of not to exceed $6,600,000 to finance construction and equipment of park improvements within the city and borough, and submitting a proposition to the voters at the election to be held therein on October 4th, 2022.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would send a bond package to the voters to consider in the municipal election on October 4, 2022. The ordinance would send one general obligation bond proposition of up to 6.6 million for the construction and equipment of park improvements within the CBJ, including turf and track surfacing for sports facilities at Adair Kennedy Park, a new public use cabin, and area-wide trail maintenance. This ordinance is being introduced at the request of the mayor. I do not have a recommendation on this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And we do have some testimony on this also. Let's see here. Could we bring up Heidi Richard Mason? Sorry if I didn't get the last name right. And please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
My name is Heidi Richards Mazon, M-A-Z-O-N. I live in Lemon Creek, and I have 3 children that use the parks facilities all over: softball, soccer, baseball, you name it. And that I'm here for the turf part. I have shoveled the Adair Kennedy turf field 6 years in a row with this shovel, because Parks and Rec, City Park will not allow us to use the snow blower or any of those equipment. So yes, that needs to be resurfaced. And I have walked that track, I don't know how many years, and have almost tripped over multiple times because all of the track have like splits and tears that just needs to be replaced. So I'm here in full support, please, for the bond to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richard Maison. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. All right, next we have Jim Ayers.
Mr. Ayers, you should be unmuted and allowed to speak at this time.
Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Jim Ayers. I'm at 17019 Island View Drive, our home. Thank you for your service. Public service is a sacrifice, and we all know that today it's a terrific challenge, but it's also a great contribution to our community. When speaking of public service in Juneau, we're reminded of Richard James Adair and Jimmy Earl Kennedy, who gave their ultimate sacrifice of their life in public service to our community. Adair Kennedy is a park dedicated to the memory of their service. It reflects our culture and our community, our commitment to one another. It's Juneau. Recreation is an interesting word. It comes from the Latin word creare, which means to create or renew. But our softball and baseball fields are an eyesore. I don't speak to the cabin or the trail issue, but I definitely believe that our recreational facilities are a great part of the skeleton of this community. This bond is a critical action in strengthening our community and provides safe, quality fields, which again are sorely lacking. Even Little League would likely be able to use it in the summertime, for it's a combination field of softball and baseball, as Sitka is doing tonight in a state tournament that they're hosting, because they have a similar field. And to be clear, ultimately, in order to provide the kind of fair, quality, safe fields, this will be a combination field. But ultimately, we should have a softball field as well, turfed. And we should take one of the Miller fields and ultimately turf it for Little League. And I'll just close by saying thank you for your support. Thank you for your service. I urge you to pass this ordinance, put this on the bond, and to actually, with your influence, work to pass this bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayers. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Is there anybody in the room that would like to speak to this ordinance? Come on up. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Ryan O'Shaughnessy. I live at 157 Gastineau Avenue. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Assembly members, for the opportunity to support this ordinance. I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director at Trail Mix Incorporated. And one of my favorite parts about my job is I get to talk to people about our trails all the time. And I would really urge the Assembly to support this ordinance and give the electorate the opportunity to put some funding towards our trails and our recreation facilities. I think it pays dividends for our community and is a great dollars to donuts, great investment for us. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. And I'm sure Madam Clerk would appreciate it if you spelled your last name.
It's spelled O''SHAUGHNESSY.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And thank you for taking my phone call a while ago when I was on Treadwell Ditch Trail. We had to know if we could get past the slide or not. Yes, true service. All right, anybody else in the room want to speak to this ordinance? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Treen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-38 and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Ms. Wall and then Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to object to this simply because I don't think this has had enough public process. We've spent a long time as an assembly trying to work through processes to understand what our priorities are. And although I'm not opposed to any of the projects on this, I think they're good projects. I would just like to see a little bit more work put into this before we put it to the voters. We just spent quite a lengthy time on City Hall and other issues that are being put on the ballot. This one feels a little premature. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am going to object to this ordinance for much of the same reason Ms. Wall did, and I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one who feels like this hasn't had its due public process. That was some of the most sort of compelling public testimony you can get in favor of an ordinance. I love our park system. I think it is really, one of our greatest attributes as a city. So I'm fully in support of, I don't want people tripping over the turf, and I don't want people shoveling. And someone hearken to the service of Adair and Kennedy and what that park means. So I'm in support of all of that. But given some of the comments that were made about City Hall and the amount of millions that we're putting on the ballot, and thinking about where this fits in the larger context, when we think back to just a few finance meetings ago, and we have staff thinking that perhaps we have some structural deficits that need to be looked at, I can't feel comfortable with a a bond that is brought forth after a lot of work that was done on the 1% just by a couple of members on the assembly and didn't make it to a finance meeting, didn't make it to some of our other committees. So I'll be a no on this.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate, I guess, the comments of the past assembly members. Of course, this is just to bring it to the ballot, and then the voters can decide if they do want to support the bonds for this amount. I think recreation and sports are critical to our community, and kind of part of our brand and culture. If this does seem like it came up late, I have been working with people on this for months, and maybe that is to my flaw that it did not come out earlier. I do appreciate the mayor getting it introduced, but I'll be in support of it. I think it moves us forward, and again, it's just bringing it to the voters to decide. So I'll be in support. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smith. Anything further? All right, I will just also put my support behind this, and although I introduced it, I worked with Mr. Smith, so he should get credit also. But this is one of those things that I actually have been working on the turf field for several years, trying to get support behind it. And lo and behold, all of a sudden we want a turf field. And so it was a good chance to, as Mr. Ayers said, to fix up Adair Kennedy. And that's one of the reasons I'm supporting it. We have let Adair Kennedy go a little bit, and it's not a good way to support our fallen officers. So with Mr. Smith jumping in, and then also we had extreme public opinion on this and public support for this project. So that's why I introduced it. Not very often we have that many people all coming together to support a project. So anyway, that's why I'm voting yes. So Madam Clerk, would you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In support of ordinance 2022-38, Ms. Treem.
Yes.
Ms. Wall,
No.
Kolakida,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Ms. Gladysevsky,
Yes.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-3.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item D, Madam Clerk.
This is ordinance 2021-08, version B, as amended AT. An ordinance appropriating $500 to the manager for the Bartlett Regional Hospital Rainforest Recovery Center. Funding provided by a donation from the Second to None Motorcycle Club.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate a $500 donation from the Second to None Motorcycle Club for Bartlett Regional Hospital's Rainforest Recovery Center to support addiction rehabilitation and recovery programs throughout the state. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there any member of the public in the room wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, Wahalgadock, we're going to skip you since you're at the airport, and we'll go to Ms. Hale. Thank you for joining us via Zoom, though.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2021-08B as amended AT. And I ask for unanimous consent, and I request permission to speak to this briefly.
Please do so.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This has come before the hospital board, and it's actually very touching. This is a group that is not even from Juneau that have donated this. It may be a small amount of money, but it's very heartfelt. They have donated this money to help with recovery efforts, and it's really, I feel it's just an honor to have received this this grant, and an honor to accept it. So I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. Item E, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, E. An ordinance appropriating $40,000 to the manager to conduct a statistically valid survey of Juneau voters related to removing sales tax on food. Funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance provides funding to the manager to contract with a research firm experienced in conducting statistically valid surveys. The firm will provide survey design services and conduct the survey. Survey will begin with education on the topic and conclude with questions that, one, assess whether or not the survey taker approves of removing sales tax on food, and two, regardless of their approval, seeks input on the method by which CBJ revenue should be replaced if sales tax were removed from food. Revenue replacement options would include annual sales tax, seasonal sales tax, and property tax. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I don't think I had anybody signed up. Is there anybody in the room who would like to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly.
Madam Mayor, can we take a 5-minute at ease? Or
Sure.
2 minutes?
Certainly, 5-minute at ease. All right. Item E, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve ordinance 2022-06 BE, an ordinance appropriating $40,000 to the manager to conduct a statistically valid survey of Juneau voters related to removing sales tax on food. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Ms. Hale and then Ms. Treen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I object for purposes of a statement / question. The paragraph that Mr. Manager read says revenue replacement options would include annual sales tax, seasonal sales tax, and property tax. And one of the conversations that I've been having, Mr. Bryson had suggested, was that, looking at options that include partial revenue replacement. And so I want to make sure that the Assembly will be able to touch the survey before it goes out. Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
Mr. Manager.
Madam Mayor, I think the Assembly can be as involved as it likes. I'm just a little worry of, group writing a survey. So I think we'll have to figure out how to get the Assembly involvement and stay at a high level.
I will do my very best to stay at a high level.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. And Ms. Treen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I object to this. I think we already have a way to conduct a statistically valid survey of Juneau voters on this, and that is by putting it on the ballot. This, I think, would just create busy work for staff and for the Assembly, and really doesn't eliminate any of the work we would have to do if we wanted to put it on the ballot. Wouldn't eliminate any of the work voters would have to do to become informed if it did go on the ballot. And I think it's just a waste of time and money.
Thank you, Ms. Treen. Any further comment? Mr. Bryson and Ms. Blaszczewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate Ms. Treen's comments. However, the one thing I'd like to point out is that we are not the first Assembly to ask this question. So that means this is not the first time that city staff has gone down this. And if we just shoot from the hip, we might have already spent $40,000 in city resources every time we ask this question. So I'm kind of in favor of this because I think we can put the question to bed once and for good. And so that we won't burden city staff in the future or future assemblies to have to wrestle with this question, because we will have gotten the answer from the community. A ballot issue would have been provided this information, but for $40,000, it almost seems like a value or a better value to get that same information than going the other way. So I'm excited to be able to put this question to bed. If the community wants it, we'll figure it out. If they don't, we'll move on to the next one. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Blaszczewski.
I'll just briefly state that I agree with Ms. Treem about it should be on the ballot. We didn't have the votes to put it on the ballot. So to me, this is just a step forward, moving it down the field, one step forward to find out what people think. If we had put an advisory vote on the ballot, we would have to put the real vote on the next ballot. And then that's just thought, many of us thought that was too confusing. So I think this is a good solution. And I agree with Mr. Bryson about finding out what people think. And then we can take action or not, depending on how that goes. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Blaszczewski. Ms. Hughes Kennis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I am going to support this. I was disappointed that we weren't able to get an actual vote on, not advisory vote, but a vote on changing the tax structure and actually doing this last time, or in adjusting that revenue some other way. In general, I think we make better decisions when we have more information as a body, but I just want to take the chance to say that I think we should be contemplative as a body in what those questions are that we feel like we need a survey and that we feel like we need to go to the population for their opinion on a specific issue, and which ones we don't, and what is driving that. What makes us have extra caution and say, we need to get your opinion again before we do something versus when we think something is the right thing to do and we do it. So I'll support this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Any further comment? I'll just weigh on this too, and a lot of people have already said it. I would support this. We couldn't come to an agreement at finance to send something to the ballot. And I think most of the reasons we couldn't is because we needed more public testimony and no one was testifying. So I think this is a good way to feel out what the public thinks. And then hopefully next year we can send something to the ballot that all of us can, or most of us could stand behind and get the question answered. So anyway, that's why I'll support this. Anyway, Madam Clerk, we have objection. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, thought I saw Walaki Doc's hand go up, but was that? Okay, thank you. Ms. Wall,
Yes.
Walaki Doc,
Yes.
Ms. Treem,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Ms. Gladysewski,
Yes.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-1.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item F, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter B, an ordinance appropriating $20,000 to the manager for short-term rental data collection, funding provided by hotel bed tax funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The Assembly discussed the topic of short-term rentals and provided direction to begin the process of collecting data on short-term rentals so the Assembly can be better equipped to make policy decisions. This appropriation would enable the manager to contract with a third-party vendor that monitors short-term rental websites to report data about the location and ownership of short-term rental units, number of nights rented, type of short-term rental, and estimated rental rates. I recommend you approve this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there any members of the public in the room that want to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we will bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06. Ordinance appropriating $20,000 to the manager for short-term rental data collection and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. Item G, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter C, an ordinance appropriating $25,000 to the manager to publicly oppose the repeal of mandatory real estate price disclosure, funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
In October 2020, the Assembly adopted ordinance 2020-47 AM to require the disclosure of real estate transaction prices to the borough assessor. Due to lack of compliance and legal issues with the confidential provision in the original ordinance, the Assembly amended the law by ordinance in February 2022 to make sales prices public and institute a civil fine for failure to disclose. A referendum to repeal these ordinances has been certified for the October 2022 ballot. The Assembly's stated intent with these ordinances was to give the assessor more access to market sales information in the interest of more accurate assessments for all property owners. A repeal would give the assessor less information, which would force the assessor to speculate about real estate market activity. Less sales information and more speculation about the market would result in less accurate assessments that are more prone to surprising value corrections. With passage of this appropriating ordinance, the Assembly and appointed officials would be able to publicly support the merit of mandatory price disclosure and oppose its repeal. The Assembly may determine that it is inappropriate for staff to advocate for the outcome of this ballot proposition and may decline to adopt this ordinance. During public hearing of this ordinance, the Assembly should debate the best way to provide the public with information about the reasons why the administration recommended and the Assembly approved the requirement for disclosure of property sale prices. As it is likely that the sponsors of the referendum will advocate in favor of passage, it is important for the Assembly to consider how the public may understand its action in balancing the needs of privacy of financial information and the needs of equitable taxation. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And there's at least one member of the public that wishes to speak to this. So David Ignell, please come up. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record once again, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. David Ignell from West Juneau again. Assembly members, I believe government should be by the people and for the people. And some of you tonight have already spoken about, letting matters go to an election and letting the people decide, what they want to do. And it's just, to me, it doesn't seem right that government would get involved in taking an advocacy position in an election in a political matter like this. I think it sets very bad precedent. If there's individuals in the community who want one thing, if they have to fight against the government for that and the funding of the government for that using taxpayer money, that just doesn't seem like the right way to go to me. And looking at the agenda here, I see item H is much of the same thing, taking advocacy. So instead of coming up here again and saying the same thing, I'll just note it for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Bryson, Mr. Ignell, can you come back up, please?
Mr. Ignell, thank you for coming and testifying tonight. I was hoping maybe you could answer this question for me because I had the same question. You mentioned that you thought that G and H were the same, whereas G, we would literally be giving money to publicly oppose a ballot initiative brought on by the citizens. I mean, they brought this to the ballot, and so then we would be using public money to oppose that position. Whereas in H, it's not a ballot initiative that the citizens brought, but more like there are a lot of good reasons that we thought that there might be a lack of understanding on this. Could you see how maybe like there would be a difference between us opposing something that the citizens brought versus us trying to educate and bring the public up to speed on what we've been working on for the last couple of years? Is there a way to see that?
Well, certainly you could find nuances and make a distinction in that, but I think that I believe in transparency in government, and I think that the public should be presented with the facts and let them decide whether you're opposing something or whether you're supporting something. I just think you start going down a rabbit hole and getting into these nuances. I think if you just simply present the facts and I would say the same thing for G, I think that government ought to present the facts, but taking a position of advocacy using taxpayer funds just doesn't seem right to me because a lot of people, there's a lot of individuals and they perceive that they have to fight government and it's just an unfair fight when it comes especially to funding issues.
Mr. Ignell, thank you very much for taking that extra time.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony tonight. All right, and then please bring over Aaron Spratt. Mr. Spratt, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record again, and you have 2 minutes.
Hello, Aaron Spratt. I live in the Valley. Just one point of reference. We aren't able to see those giving public testimony in the city assembly. So I don't know if there's a way to fix that or if that's intentional. I think that you guys fixed it. Thank you. I very much agree with Mr. Ignall's point of view. This ordinance, I believe, is sloppily written in the sense of, one, the large caveat that is given to the assembly, and two, it wants to appropriate $25,000 and it doesn't say how that money is going to be spent. Is this going to be signs? Is it going to be radio ads? Is it going to be the city manager yelling on a street corner? I don't know how this money is going to be appropriated. And I would encourage the assembly to, to be mindful of the optics of what you're doing and saying that you want the voters to be heard and they have spoken on this issue and you don't like it. So you're taking actions and taking tax dollars to oppose the citizens. And I would just remind you all, as Mr. Ignall did, that you are to represent the voters and not to just have your own idea and advocate for whatever you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spratt. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else in the room wish to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move ordinance 2022-06 BC. And I'm sure there will be debate.
Ms. Treem and then Mr. Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I mostly have questions for the manager, although I do want to maybe facetiously say I'll support it if it does mean he gets to yell on a street corner. But what is it that you would spend money on? And I guess what's throwing me off is the words publicly opposing and publicly supporting in these ordinance titles, when what I would see would be an appropriate thing for us to do would be to just give facts, as our public testifier stated, versus advocacy. And publicly oppose and publicly support mean to me advocacy. So is that what would happen?
Thank you, Ms. Train. Mr. Who's taking that? Mr. Palmer's taking that.
We'll do a little tag team on this. Excuse me. So the reason why this ordinance is before you, like the one following this ordinance, is state law. So state law provides that we as government are allowed to inform and educate the public without anything special. However, if we as government, as the assembly decides, if you decide tonight that you want to influence the outcome of an election and you want to use money or government services, that includes email, for example, in a recent Supreme Court case, you have to pass an appropriation specifically for that purpose. And so it's a statute administered by APOC, the Alaska Public Offices Commission, and that's why we're here before you. So if you want the government, whether it's the manager, the deputy manager, or the finance director, to advocate against the ballot initiative, you have to pass an appropriation ordinance for that purpose. If you don't want advocacy, if you just want basic information given and not a position taken, then you would not have to pass this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Ms. Train, do you have a follow-up?
Mr. Watt maybe has the answer to the other part of my question. What activities that would entail?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think it would be a fine line to walk on providing information. I would imagine that in the election forums, there will be invitations for people to come to debates. And where and how you cross the line in a debate from providing factual information to expressing an opinion can be a little challenging. So one, I think that would be a means of providing information. A second question I think we would have to contemplate is, would we do anything like a postcard mail out to the voters, or would we put information on the radio expressing opinions about this? in terms of what we would actually do, I think that would come back to the assembly if it makes the philosophical decision to go beyond factual information. On the other side of the question, it's unclear what the sponsors of the referendum will do for public information. And as I note in the manager's report, I think the best we can do is think how the public can understand the competing public interests that have been identified. So at the staff and assembly level, we have recommended and you have supported mandatory disclosure, valuing equity in taxation as a important public good, and the supporters of the referendum are supporting the idea of privacy of financial information. So I think that needs to be explained to the public, or I think it would be better if that was explained to the public that there are, it's a complicated issue and you have to choose a path. And I think given that the supporters of the referendum are likely to have advocacy footprint, we have to decide whether it's appropriate if there's a municipal support for similar information.
Any further questions from Mr. Miller? All right, we have Mr. Bryson, Ms. Gladaszewski, and Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank Michelle Hughes Scandies for her last statement. When do we ask the citizens the question again, and when do we do what's right? And this would be an example of we didn't get enough citizen input, that it had enough contention in the community that they gathered, collected, and came up with did enough of the actions to get their own ballot initiative on here. If we would have been a little bit more thorough during that process, we might have avoided this. So we took these actions and put this without advocacy, without reaching out in the community. And so this is kind of the backlash of it. I can't support us advocating against it because we got our time to do without asking the citizens. They pushed back. Now it's their time to have the question asked on their behalf. And so, man, I support a lot of what we do. I can't do that tonight on this particular ordinance. Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryson, Ms. Gladaszewski, Ms. Hale, and then Ms. Hughes Scandies.
I have a question and then a comment. The question about, I agree with the testifier about we want to present facts. One of you two, and I forget which one already, it's been 40 whole seconds, suggested people running for office always answer the question, are you going to support or oppose this ballot measure? That's a standard question and a standard response. Someone was over here suggesting that we might not be able to do that. I should be able to go to whatever group and say, here's the reason I voted for this ordinance. I'm happy to do that. I think we did the right thing. Someone suggesting we can't do that if we don't, unless we appropriate money for APOC. Mr. Palmer.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And Ms. Gladaszewski, that was definitely not my intent if that's what you heard. So you as an individual, as a assembly member, any individual in the community, you have a personal opinion. You have the right to advocate for that personal opinion. The distinction here is what happens when there's a void, when there's a lack of group, there's lack of information being given out to compete with other advocacy. And whether you as the assembly decide to appropriate this ordinance tonight is your decision. But if you want staff to be able to advocate for why the assembly took action, you would need to appropriate this money for that purpose. If you just want staff providing basic information and trying to thread that line, then you would not need to appropriate the ordinance.
And there will be a voter information guide piece like always, and the facts will be in there. Is that correct?
Yeah, if that's a question, yes, we would, whether this passes or not, there would still be a voter information packet out there. And like any past ballot item, there would be a neutral summary of it.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any further?
No, that's okay. I just wanted to clarify that I could go and scream from the rooftops that I think this was a good decision that the city made, and I do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I understand the concern of city staff about the information that is out there about this ballot initiative and the information that might go out there. I've heard when signature gathering was occurring, I heard some information where there were errors and actually in the information that was presented, and I think probably unintentionally, but there were errors. I also was at the end before the ballot initiative, before there were signature gathering, I received a poll with some very strange questions. The poll was trying to determine what was the best strategy for convincing Juneau voters. And to me, it felt like there were conspiracy theories, and it was a very strange poll. I would actually like to see a copy of that poll if we could someday, but we don't know who actually, who generated that poll, and we have no way of knowing because APOC doesn't require the people that generated that poll to actually file that. So we don't know where that came from. I don't agree with city staff opposing this measure. I am very concerned about how that appears. I'm concerned that residents would see some of the concerns that we've heard about, or have some of the concerns that we've heard about tonight. I don't think that's a good idea. That said, I think I voted for the disclosure and I voted for the fine. I think there are people that have actively encouraged people not to disclose their real estate sales information. So I don't want to fine anybody. I don't know if we have fined anyone. Perhaps Mr. Rogers could tell us that. So I very much support that action that the assembly took. I am happy to attend forums. I have already reached out to the Chamber of Commerce and let them know that I would be happy to present on this, why I voted for this. So I think it's much more appropriate for assembly members to do that job. I think that is our job to do. And it's tricky because we have a citizens ballot initiative, but I think that is our responsibility. I do have one question about the voter information, if I could ask that, please, of Mr. Manager or Mr. Attorney. And I just can't remember. It's my recollection that when there is an initiative, there's sort of a pro and a con. Is that correct? Or is it just information about the measure? Do we provide information, or do the sponsors of this ballot measure also provide information? How does that work?
Who's taking that one? Mr. Watt. Oh, Mr. Palmer.
I lost the thumb war there. So both options happen. Sometimes we just provide a neutral statement and just explain the basic facts. Other times when there are advocacy groups on both sides, so we can get positions from both sides, we provide a neutral statement and then positions, a couple paragraphs, possibly from parties on each side advocating for something. So we do our best to strike that balance and to find what's most fair and informative. And it will do whatever the assembly decides.
One follow-up?
Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. So then my question is that if the sponsoring group advocates, would it be possible for one of the members of the assembly who supported this measure to have a counter viewpoint in that ballot packet? Because and I'm asking this because I don't plan to vote for this. I don't think it's a good idea for city staff to do this, but I also don't want to leave this important action that we took out hanging in the breeze with nobody supporting our decision.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hale. I would caution that any assembly member is doing this because we're a body, and having one assembly put their stuff on a ballot. I would have a little problem with that, but I will go to Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's a little tricky. So I can think of historically where we've had instances where there were clear advocacy groups in support or against an idea. Ones that I recall, whether or not to ban plastic grocery bags or whether or not to put fluoride in drinking water. And we had clear groups that were supporting two different positions. In the voter information guide, there were statement support, statement against. In this case, I think the sponsors of the referendum would have a statement in favor. We don't have another community group out there that has organized themselves. I think the question really probably is best framed as, could the assembly be the writer of that, or could the assembly direct the manager to write something on behalf of the assembly? And Mr. Palmer can take it from here.
And
Palmer.
I can take that answer. The answer is no, without this ordinance being passed.
But can I ask a question about this issue?
You have to wait your
Oh,
turn.
okay.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Palmer, does and that you're saying without this passing, you couldn't do that. And I take it you're saying that based on that APOC guidance. So does President say that it has to be an appropriating ordinance? If we said, no, we don't think it's right to spend government resources opposing citizens, but we want to shout from the rooftops that we think this was the right idea, or at least explain why we think this is the right idea, couldn't we not separate out those two things?
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you. And the statute that APOC manages does specifically say it has to be an appropriating ordinance.
Follow up, Ms. Candies?
Well, I'll just say briefly, since it's been a mix of comments and questions. You know, I appreciate someone saying that it's just a bad precedence to set. You presenting the facts is different than advocating against citizens who take the time and get organized and get enough support to get this on the ballot. So I have those same concerns where I wouldn't want us to be spending city resources. I do, however, understand that that's a fine line. And I guess my only concern is, you know, I'm inclined to vote against this, but my only concern would be that I wouldn't want the ballot statement to be too bloodless. Someone's idea presenting the facts versus where that strays into advocacy, I understand is very difficult. For instance, Mr. Bryson said earlier, we didn't receive enough testimony, and I have a completely different take on how that happened. And I would say we have a special interest group who definitely made their views known when we took testimony, and they have financial gain from this, and they're organized and they're licensed. And so I understand that that's hard for staff. I guess, you know, if it was appropriating $1, I'm not sure if I could support that or not, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Ms. Wall and then Ms. Train.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a tricky one, but I think a lot of the assembly members have expressed the same concerns that I have. You know, I trust our staff to provide us data and information, and I often trust their recommendations, and I did on this one. And I, you know, still believe that mandatory property disclosure is a good idea. But that doesn't mean that our community, you know, trusts government in the same way that maybe we do. And I feel like that's our number one job, is to make sure the community trusts our government. And I just think that this is going to do too much harm to that trust that we are working to build, even if it would result in more information being out there on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Train and then Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this one in particular is a tough one, maybe tougher for me than the next ordinance we'll be talking about, because we do have one group that was negatively impacted by our ordinance to make disclosure mandatory. And that means this small group was able to organize, and the benefits of mandatory disclosure are a lot more diffuse across Juneau. So it's really unlikely that there's going to be a competing advocacy group that organizes for the election to support mandatory disclosure. That said, I share the same concerns that everyone else does. I guess it would depend on maybe Mr. Palmer's feelings, but I would hope that if, there were radio ads or bumper stickers saying the sky is purple, that we could do a Facebook post that says, actually, the sky is gray. So I don't know if that would be allowed, if that kind of activity would be allowed, but I don't think I could support this ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Ms. Gladysevsky.
I've gone around the horn on this multiple times in the last 15 minutes. It seems like we are constrained by what APOC rules allow. All I want out there are facts. I want us to be able to get the facts. And if we can just present facts, I think, and people can hear them. Obviously, those of us, I think we all voted for it. We think we did the right thing. Facts would be what's in the manager's report. If the manager can put out information like that, this is during the meeting, the assembly did X because of Y. Those are facts. Can't you put those facts out? I'm trying to understand where is the line. I mean, I understand mailing a postcard would be advocacy, but can't you have a statement on the website that says this is a facts about mandatory disclosure? I mean, where is that? I don't want us to be completely hamstrung and not be able to put out any facts. I don't know that we should send a postcard though, but if we need to appropriate $5,000 in order to be able to get out the facts, I'm again struggling with where is the legal line and where we have good facts.
Can we ask him the question?
Yeah. So, where's the line? And
Mr. Palmer, where's the line?
I'll do my best. So it's not facts that are probably the most operative issue. It's how those facts are stitched together and tell a story. So the legal standard is, have we spent money to influence the outcome of an election? So it's influence the outcome of an election. That's the operative issue. And if we are neutral and not attempting to influence the outcome, then we don't hit that threshold and we're fine. But if we breach that threshold without this ordinance, there's a potential for an APOC violation.
Anything further, Ms. Gladysevsky? Okay, we're going to pause. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is for ordinance 2022-06B, capital letter C, an ordinance appropriating $25,000 to the manager to publicly oppose the repeal of mandatory real estate price disclosure funding provided by general funds. Ms. Gladysevsky.
No.
Wolaki Doc, are you still with us?
I am. And
Oh, you just muted yourself again.
oh, I vote no.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wall,
No.
Ms. Treem,
No.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
No.
Motion fails.
All right, I'm trying to go through all these if anybody's asking, so Wahalgadot can vote. So we'll move on to item H, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter C, an ordinance appropriating $25,000 to the manager to publicly support a general obligation bond for the construction and equipment of a new city hall. Funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
Committee of the Whole selected 450 Whittier Street as the preferred site for a new city hall during the April 11, 2022 meeting. Assembly requested staff draft an ordinance to submit a proposition to the voters on the October 4, 2022 election ballot during the June 6, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting. This ordinance would appropriate $25,000 for the Assembly and appointed officials to advocate for this proposition and educate the public of the merits of construction of a new city hall prior to the October election. Whether or not to authorize the construction of a new city hall is an important long-term decision for the community. In accordance with Alaska Statute 1513-145, this ordinance will allow staff to properly and accurately convey information to the public and will allow staff to participate in debates regarding the merits of the proposal. Absent municipal participation in this important public decision, voters are likely to not have access to the best facts or best arguments in favor of the proposal for a new city hall. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I don't see anybody signed up for this ordinance, but is there any member in the audience that wishes to speak to this? Seeing none, we will bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022-06D. BD, an ordinance appropriating $25,000 the manager to publicly support a general obligation bond for construction and equipment of a new city hall. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Gladishevsky.
I object. We just voted the first one down. This is the exact same thing. The first was to defend our decision that we made, and this is also to defend a decision that we made. And I was on the fence on it, but once I finally worked through it, if we're going to vote no on that one, we have to vote no on this one.
Thank you, Ms. Gladishevsky. Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Hale.
I would like to thank Ms. Gladishevsky and also one of our previous testifiers. I was really clear on this before we started discussing it, and I have kind of gone back to the middle to decide how different is it? Is this different enough from the opposing a citizen initiative versus informing the community of something we've been working on for the last 2 years that I truly believe will save the community money in the long run? I can't even say that without it sounding as advocacy. So knowing how I feel about the topic and the way that I want to be able to speak about the topic, I think I'm going to have to support this so that I can advocate, because I do believe this is, if the ordinance passes, then we can advocate. I thought that's what we just.
You can always personally.
Well, personally, oh, then I can personally.
Yes.
Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
Sure, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hale and then Ms. Hughes Candies.
Before I move to my comments, Mr. Palmer, would you say that verbally and not just a nod? Because there are people listening. Thank you.
You bet. So thank you, Ms. Hale. And as any individual assembly member in their personal capacity, you can advocate for or against any item. You can express your opinion on any ballot item.
Thank you. And now I would like to actually make my statement. Thank you. Thank you. I also do not support this measure. I feel that there is a pretty clear difference in my mind between this and the previous one that we talked about. And that is, even though I don't like the way that previous citizens initiative was formed and brought, it is coming from our citizens. And I really didn't agree with opposing something that was coming from our citizens. This is different this is just, this is supporting, as Ms. Gladishevsky said, this is supporting a decision that the assembly made. I still don't support this, but I see also why we're trying to do this. And one of the things I think that we're suffering from right now is through the pandemic. I think that the ways that people have gotten information about our business, we were commenting tonight that this is the largest number of people in city chambers or in assembly chambers since before the pandemic started. This is the largest number of people we've had. So the whole way that we've conducted business with our citizenry has changed. And at the same time, for years now, the way that information reaches our citizens has changed. It used to be that people could pick up the newspaper and they would know what was going on. That's still true, but a lot of people are not picking up that newspaper. So some people get their news from the radio, some from K2, some from KNMY, some from the newspaper, some from social media. And often the news that comes through social media is quite laden with opinions. So what we have is kind of a perfect storm here where there's a lot of concern about how people are getting information. I think we need to figure out how to solve that issue. I was just in Port Townsend, and my friend in Port Townsend said that the city sends out just an information bulletin. Here's what's happening in the city once a month. Maybe that's something we need to think about, but I still can't support this because I do agree it's not a road that we want to go down. Information is one thing, but weighing in on an election is another. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. And for the record, Wahal Gadok is no longer with us, Madam Clerk. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I think a lot of people said they really wrestled with the last one, and I know I did. However, to me, there's a huge difference between these two. And I think the largest part of it is that we voted to do this. If there's that black and white line, or the opposite, if there's a gray line and it's hard to know when you're steering into advocacy, I'm absolutely okay to keep us on the right side of APOC and to keep city staff well abreast of our intentions of what we'd like them to do, to say, go out there and provide facts and present the case that you presented to us, because I think this is it makes total sense, and I would like it to succeed. When in comparing and contrasting the two, for me, when I picture myself in the shoes of a citizen who got together with other citizens and gathered enough signatures and knew I was getting something on the ballot, I asked myself how I would feel if then the government was spending my funds to work against me. That to me is totally different than us saying, we're going to put this thing on the ballot. We think it's a good idea. And we have to be careful not to stray into advocacy. We want to share our facts for why we think it's a good idea. But if we are too enthusiastic about that, then we need to pass this ordinance. Then I'm entirely comfortable doing that. And to me, they're pretty different. And I'll be in support of this.
Thank you. So before anybody else, I'll chime in real quickly. I see these as two different votes. Also, I voted no on the other one, probably for a lot different reasons than everybody else, because I was never for the ordinance in the first place. But this one I see, as Mr. Bryson said, we've been working on this one for months, and the people who have been working on it is our staff. So I see this as hamstringing our staff to advocate for us, because they can't speak as the city. They have to speak individually, as we've found out over and over again. So I would vote for this, just for them to set out their business case that most of us have, once we know the true facts, have said, yes, that's a good idea. So I'd like to give them the power to do the same thing to the public. Mr. Bryson. And then Ms.
Madam Mayor, I figured out my question. And I say we, the Public Works and Engineering, the director, deputy director, and I had briefly discussed the possibility of taking the information, and I believe the phrase was a roadshow, so that we could take information that said, this is why we chose this spot. This is the reasons what came down to the cost, and answer questions like, we still get asked, why not Walmart? When we found out Walmart would cost almost double what building new City Hall would cost. So could members of Public Works and Engineering, if we don't pass this, still be able to go to different Rotary chamber groups and bring a presentation and says, these are the reasons why we discovered this was the best location for City Hall and the bond? Because that was how we were going to get the information out there. That's the hamstring that I think Madam Mayor was talking about. Would this, if we don't pass this, would that prevent members of Public Works and Engineering from advocating to the local citizen groups?
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I see that Mr. Watt lost that thumb war. So Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's quite tricky. So in making the business case for City Hall, some of those arguments are subjective arguments. So saying things like having all the offices in one place would be more convenient and more efficient, right? So those are those facts or are those suppositions? I think it's actually quite tricky. If the Assembly did not pass this, it's likely that we would have a very muted public involvement and very limited. I would not want to put my staff in a position of making an APOC violation. I'd probably put myself in that position. I honestly think it would be very uncomfortable in this particular case to walk that line.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Mr. Bryson basically covered the question I was going to ask. I guess a follow-up to that would be, if we pass this ordinance, would you actually, which would cover us under the APOC rules, would you actually plan to spend any money?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think what would happen is we would come back to the Assembly with a plan. And this could be the number 25,000 is pretty non-specific. I think there are options in what we could do. On the low end, it would be staff participation in debates and forums and invitations to civic groups. I think it goes up from there, whether we would do a postcard or whether we would do ads on the radio or some other social media type presence. So I think the Assembly could help steer the level of involvement.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Ms. Treem, follow up.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure I fully understand before I vote. If we pass this ordinance, then you are free and clear to go to the chamber, go to Rotary groups, do whatever to talk about what we've been talking about for the last, feels like forever, 12 months. But we wouldn't be required to spend any money, but you would be free and clear to go to those things to talk about it, right?
That's correct.
All right, thank you, Ms. Treem. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment to hold up our local media and our local journalists, our radio and newspapers who do a great job every day of presenting the facts. I think they have a lot of access to the information that we have been providing, talking about over the last year. And so no matter how this goes, it's good to know that there are others out there that will be communicating with the public about these matters beyond us.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this is for the attorney. Does that state law, it applies to school districts as well? So if there's for like a school, I'm just trying to think of these situations where there's seemingly very not like a advocacy group for an issue. So, I mean, I guess if there was like school bonds, principals can't advocate and the school district can't advocate, but parents and anyway, those would be people who are advocating. And that's how I guess it happened in the past in Juneau. Just confirm.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes, Mr. Smith. So the state law does apply to schools as well. It just separating kind of some categories for you. It applies to government, so state governments or political subdivisions of the state or school districts of the state. So it applies to government institutions. It does not apply to non-government institutions. So like an association of school boards, for example, Alaska Association of School Boards, there's a APOC opinion on that. And it, even though there's partial funding from government members, it did not apply to them.
All right, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just a little bit of information. We do every year when we do the voter information guide, the Assembly appropriates funds for that, and we do an APOC filing. I've been asked whether we have appropriated funds in support of a ballot measure before, and I've answered that I don't believe that we had, but I was corrected by local architect who advised me that school facility project, we did actually appropriate funds for renovation of one of our elementary schools some years ago. So I don't have an exhaustive history of what we've done on this topic, and recognize that the law interpretation of law probably has moved over time as well.
Ms. Gladchevsky.
It's interesting. I mean, this one to me seems super self-serving, and Ms. Wall talked about community support and trust in government. And I think this could do more harm than the other one. And again, to me, they're the same. We did a thing we thought was right in both cases. And I think we have good facts for those cases, and we can always tell those facts. Putting money to what it could be seen as a fancy building for the city, which actually I don't agree that that's the right characterization, but that's how it will look. So that's, I'll be voting no.
Thank you, Ms. Gladchevsky. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is for the passage of ordinance 2022-06, version B-D. Mr. Bryson.
Yes.
Ms. Hale.
No.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
No.
Ms. Treem.
No.
Ms. Wall.
No.
Ms. Gladchevsky.
No.
And Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion fails, 3 yeas, 5 nays.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. We will take a break now. Since we've been at it for a while, let's take 15 minutes. So now we're on to new business and our first item, item A. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is hardship and senior citizen disabled veteran, nonprofit late filed real property tax exemption applications.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
There are 9 property owners that have requested the assembly authorize the assessor to consider a late filed exemption for their property assessment. They are on packet page 71. The assembly should consider each of these separately and make a motion on whether to accept their appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would say that the assembly members looked at each one of these applications and considered them individually. And I would move that the city assessor accept these appeals and put them in the docket for consideration for Richard Earl Parton, James T. Craig, Sharon Gateman, Brenda Holdener, Richard Earl Parton, Brad Ryder, Court Saviors, James Thompson, and Michael Voulet. Bill, thank you, Madam Mayor.
And you ask for.
And I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Any objection? Seeing none, those applications are reviewed. Item B, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Regulation 20 CBJ AC 40.520 Class A endorsement taxi rate change.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The commercial passenger vehicle regulations provide for Class A endorsement, taxi rates and fees. The proposed regulations provide for an increase in the 2 discrete rates, the flag drop and the mileage rate. The flag drop rate would increase from $3.40 to $4, and the mileage rate would increase from 22 cents per 1/10th mile to 25 cents per 1/12th mile. The proposed regulations would also eliminate 2 discrete additional fees, the $1 airport to and from fee and the $1.50 cruise ship dock fee. Finally, the proposed regulations would replace the existing language describing the taxi cleaning fee, not change this rate. I recommend you adopt this regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Manager. Is there any member of the public in the room that wishes to speak to this regulation? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Glaszewski.
I would move that the assembly adopt this regulation, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection, Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I object for purposes of a question. I don't know if this is Mr. Manager or Mr. Deputy Manager. We received quite a bit of communication from people talking about the taxi service in Juneau. And I know taxi service has been really problematic and difficult for the taxi companies and the taxi drivers during the pandemic. But there are many instances where people are unable to get rides, people arriving at 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, and there are no taxis. And I just wonder, this came up a couple of years ago in Public Works and I managed it poorly, but I wonder at what point we in Juneau might think of looking at our taxi regulations and making sure they actually are keeping pace with the times, and maybe taking a look to see if we have to change those taxi regulations. Does anyone have thoughts or comments on that?
Mr. Deputy Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Big questions. I think the short answer is that this is something that we look at least annually, although this is the second one that we've done recently. I'm in regular communication with one taxi owner in particular. There's only a handful in town. The others certainly are willing to reach out and discuss too. Increasing the rate, I think, is one of those changes that will hopefully enable taxi owners to hire more taxi drivers and make that more economical. I don't recall exactly how long it has been since the rate has increased, although I do know we have people in the room who do know that, but it has been quite some time. And so, looking at more of those regulations and looking at them in a comprehensive way is something that is perennially on the to-do list and something that we will continue to look at.
Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. And I really also speak for, when I lived in Anchorage, I traveled to Juneau and kind of was subject to that late night arrival with no taxis. So I'm trying to speak for, legislators, et cetera, that come into Juneau. I do understand from some in the public that there's a high bar to entry in the taxi field. And I just don't know if maybe we need to be looking at that high bar to entry because we do have a problem in Juneau with enough taxis, and maybe the rate increase will help. Thanks. I will move my objection.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Ms. Stream.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Do we take public testimony on this?
I asked and nobody
Oh, okay. I missed that. Thank you.
step forward. Mr. Bryson, did you want to speak? All right. Anyway, we'll go back to the assembly then if no one has talked. Ms. Glaschewski.
I made a motion tonight. I made a motion to adopt it.
Oh, sorry.
And ask for unanimous consent.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Sorry, it's getting late. Any objection beside Ms. Hale, who she removed hers. So, all right, seeing none, this regulation passes. Our next is item C, and who is taking this one? Mr. Watt.
Madam Mayor, this is the matter of the Paris family request to purchase city property in the 12,000 block of Glacier Highway. Packet page 88 begins your packet information. I think it runs through about page 99. In May 2021, we received an application to purchase city property out in the area. We have a small sliver of property that's managed by the Parks Department. Technically, I think the idea is that parcel would be a beach access, though I don't know that it gets used or has ever been used very much. This issue went to the Lands Committee, Lands Housing and Economic Development Committee, and that committee was unable to move a recommendation to the Assembly. Applicant, staff, and the neighborhood need direction. You can provide direction tonight or refer to the matter to a committee. There are three choices which are on packet page 89 at the bottom of the memo. Option 1, retain this property for public use. Option 2, enter into direct negotiations with the applicant. Or option 3, solicit additional proposals from other interested parties. Those three choices come from the land code 5309260. So we're looking for some direction. I think a fair amount of time has been spent on this already, and clear direction is necessary. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there any member of the public? Whoops, actually, we have members of the public to talk to this one. So, Mr. Priest. So please state your name and area of the town you live in, even though we have a map, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jim Parise, and I live in Ock Bay with my wife Kelly and my son Matthew, and then I had 3 other kids that went through our public schools. So we've been here 20 years. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is get a permanent easement across a right of way that right now, if you look at the plot of land that is going to go across, half of the right of way is blocked by a wall that was put up by the state, and the other half is just this little sliver. If you walk off the sidewalk, you go straight down a straight hill, it goes into some brush and then some deadfall and alder. So it's almost impossible to get. It's unusable, it's dangerous, and it's steep. If we put this right away in, it will extend, it will be 20 feet at least farther away from the sidewalk to be level. And then we'll build a ramp down to the land and then cut a trail through to the beach for the city. And then we'll maintain the driveway because it'll be our driveway to our home. So we'll have to keep it up for the summer. I mean, in the winter, there's terrible berms that are there that we've seen. So those will be cleared. So to us, it's a win-win because it gives us access to our home and it gives the residents of the city access to beach access, which is not available now, even though it is a park. A lot of the old pictures that were shown before, it looked like there's parking there and there's no parking because the flat land that's next to it is privately held. And it will be built fairly soon, I believe, by the owner. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Priest? Ms. Wall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Priest. The kind of difference between you having an easement on city property versus you owning the land and the city having an easement, how do you see do you have a preference between those two options or how are you?
Yeah,
seeing those
when
two?
we started off, we asked for permanent easement. And the city, we couldn't figure, so we went in front of the Parks Advisory Committee. They seemed at least amenable and said, go work with the city on this to find out if we can get something done. And they said, come back and tell us how you're going to build a path down to the beach, which we said we would. How we have a garage, and I mean, I call it a garage, but it's this building on about 30-foot piers. And they said, you have to block that off. And I said, okay, so we'll block that off and we'll recurb that so that's no longer accessible, which is dangerous to begin with, because when you I sent a video, I don't know if it came across, but the reason I sent the video is because if you can't see the car on the other side of this wall that comes, you can't see it until it's at the driveway. The reason that has never come up, I think before I'm getting a little off track, I'm sorry, but that wall was built while the people who owned it owned an Airbnb. So there was never anybody really going in and out of there because it was all renters. They never actually parked there. So when we moved in, we went, holy cow, this is dangerous. I mean, it's dangerous for us. It's dangerous for bikers. It's dangerous for everybody else coming out of there. So we said, okay, we'd like to have this easement. And the city came back and said, that it was illegal for us to be able to do it because of an ordinance. And that's when I asked for Mr. Walsh to help me out. And then he's going to come up, if he can come up and explain why we think that ordinance was not read correctly. So they said, okay, the solution would be for you to purchase the land and give the city an easement. And we said, we're just trying to find a solution. Fine. So we went in front of Lands Committee and they said, that doesn't work. But we think something has to be able to work. So let's try to figure something out. So we're back saying, I mean, I don't know about the ordinances and that is for you and Mr. Walsh can explain it. To me, the easiest thing is a permanent easement because it's a win-win, because it gives us access, but it gives the public access to the beach now, which they don't have. I mean, if you look at if we have a temporary easement now. So we did build a temporary driveway. And if you've gone out there or drive by there, you can see it will look like that, except better because we'll regrade it. It won't be quite as steep. And once we get fill in there, but if we don't, we have to tear all that out. And when we tear it out, it's just a straight cliff down to deadfall.
Any further questions for Mr. Priest? Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Priest. So from the beginning, when you planned this to the version of solution that you think you have now, how many different solutions have you tried to come up with to just try and get it where you're safely able to park on your street and properly access or have a good border between yourself and the CBJ land? What
I would say 3 or 4, because we started off with started off talking to the city and thought we could just get an because on every plot and plan it says right away. We didn't know it was a park until we put in the permit, and then they said, no, that's actually a park. So then we had to go in front of the Parks Advisory Committee, then went back and worked with the city for a while. And I have to say, Dan Blindort has done a great job. I mean, he's been fantastic to work with, because it has to be frustrating for him too, because I keep coming back to him for a year and a half. We've been working on this. I mean, he's patient and I appreciate that. And so we worked with him, and then they said, well, this ordinance won't allow you to come on the side for some reason, which is what Mr. Walsh can explain. And then we went in front of the lands committee. So, but it's been over a year and a half of just trying to write letters, follow-ups, explain what we're trying to do. Because I was fine with the purchasing of the land, I still am, but to me, we're not trying to buy land. I mean, that's not what I'm not trying to do a land grab. I'm not that interested in it. I just really want, all I really want is the access.
Thank you.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Paris, thanks for being here. When you bought the land, when you bought the property, the house, I would expect that you knew what the parking situation was then. Did you?
We did, yeah. I mean, we obviously did.
Okay.
It's just, I also thought I could park on that. If you see it, it goes across this sidewalk, and then there's this parking like platform before it gets into the garage. And so our plan was to park on that platform. But in the last 2 months, I received a parking ticket for parking there, which was not a happy development because it was on my own land. But it's because I'm crossing the sidewalk is why I got the parking ticket.
Ms. Hale.
And you don't park in the garage?
Mm-mm.
And
It's,
why?
I mean, because the parking garage has these, we thought we could, but then when we looked at, I mean, we didn't do a good enough assessment of the shape of that thing. And if you look underneath, I mean, there's like these beams, and they're all kind of going like that because it's starting to slide downhill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Mr. Priest? Mr. Smith?
Just on that, have you looked into what the costs of rebuilding the garage so that it's functional? Just curious, we're obviously looking at
I
all the
haven't
options.
got to that yet. My project is wildly over budget, and so I haven't even just thought about that horror yet.
Okay, thank you.
But we may have to do, we may have to do that eventually.
Ms. Glaschewski.
Sorry, excuse me, I have questions for staff.
All right, any further questions for Mr. Paris? All right, I have one. I may have missed it, but why can't you put a driveway on your own property?
Because there's a wall that covers essentially the entire property and halfway through the CBJ property that the state put up when they did the widening of the road and put up a retaining wall there.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Ms. Glaschewski, you want to ask your question?
I do. I have two questions. Where did all these comments come from, and who, where does that come from? A, and B, regarding an easement or not an easement, what about public access to the beach? Do people have public access to the beach through this property, and would an easement hold that up? So those are two questions.
Madam Mayor, I do think Mr. Blydorn is online, and he was going to know the most. So
There's lots of people commenting, a lot of yeses and nos.
Clerk, will you pull Mr. Blydorn over? Mr. Blydorn, did you hear the question?
I believe so, yes. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Where those comments came from. Those comments came from the PrAC meetings. They sent out postcards to the neighborhood regarding this when they were doing their initial review.
All right, and Ms.
So
Glaschewski had a second question.
Let me just clarify that. You mean people emailed the PrAC? And this is the comments the PrAC took? Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
Yes, well, they came through Parks and Rec staff as part of that meeting process.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dream.
But my second question was.
Part B of the question, Ms. Glaschewski, you want to restate it?
Yeah, it was about public beach access and whether this property could provide that in the future or does provide it, and would any of these proposals preclude that? Either buying the property or easements on the property?
Mr.
That's a
Blighter.
great question. And so currently, like the applicant stated, it's not really accessible for beach access. It was retained when we retained a number of properties from the state for that purpose in the future. And I think either outcome, if we sell it, if dispose of it, or grant an easement over it, I think either way, staff will work to retain property rights so we can continue to have that public access to the beach. So for example, if we continue to own it and grant an easement, we'll have still ownership rights. And if we sell it and dispose of it, we will grant an easement at disposal that would allow public to pass through the property.
Okay, so both would still allow public access.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Treem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for, I'm not sure which staff member, and just because I see it mentioned in these comments, is what would the difference be between an easement and selling the land in terms of taxing it?
Mr. Palmer?
I'm losing tonight. So the options on taxing are when we own, or let me put it this way, when property is privately owned, it's taxed, let's say 100%. If we only give somebody an easement, it is taxable, but it's a much lower value because there's an encumbrance on the property.
All right, before we ask any more questions of staff, let's bring up Mr. Walsh. Continue our public comment. Mr. Walsh, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Murray Walsh. I live in West Juneau. This is my first time in this room since the pandemic hit, but I've been in it many times before helping people like Mr. Perez. It's worth remembering that property is developed in phases and the rules change over time. This particular property was platted 60 or 70 years ago. At that time, Glacier Highway would have probably not been considered an arterial. Today, this lot wouldn't even be legal because it fronts on an arterial. It would have had to be developed some other way. But the rule that derailed this application, it was looking good. Everybody seemed fine with it until last December, when the planning director said that the only way you could access a lot was across the front yard because of a provision in the subdivision code that says all lots must satisfy the minimum frontage requirement and have direct and practical access to the right of way. At the time they are platted, this is a rule for how to design a subdivision. It would have been nice if people had paid. This rule probably didn't even exist when this lot was platted. It is not a rule for how you can develop your lot once it has been platted. It is not a prohibition about building a driveway across a side lot line. And the director is making a mistake to interpret that it does. So when I asked her about it, she proposed that the applicant buy the property, thus extending the front lot line all further over to the next private property. Therefore, it would still amount to a driveway that's crossing the front lot line. It seems like a artificial distinction to me, especially when, but we said, okay, if that's what the staff wants us to do, that's what we'll do. And here we are. This is why tonight it's being presented to you as an application to buy that piece of property. The applicant never really wanted to buy it. He just wanted the easement. We'll take it however we can get it, but
Mr. Walsh, I have to stop you because you're out of time.
boy, that's a fast 2 minutes. Anyway.
Who has questions for Mr. Walsh? Mr. Bryson?
So whether the applicant receives an easement or permission to buy the property, the applicant's acceptable with either outcome that just allows him to access his property properly. That's the only outcome that we're looking for here.
The only outcome we're looking for is permission in some form to build that driveway to access as his drawings are showing.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Walsh, just to confirm what I think you were saying. Originally, the applicant had applied for an easement to build a driveway.
Yes.
The CDD director said that wasn't permitted in code. A better way, or the CD director or other city staff said a better way would be to purchase the parcel. And then that would actually allow the development of a driveway that would meet code.
It would meet her interpretation of the code. The code does not actually specify that you can or cannot access your property from something other than the front lot line, over the front lot line. It's just not there. So that to me means the city has the discretion to do whatever it pleases. The applicant's best solution is an easement. Costs less money and the city still gets the benefit of an improved public access. I should point out that there is no public access from the street to the beach across this property now. There will be such access created as a result of a successful resolution of this. And it would make a kind of a nice little neighborhood park sort of thing, beach amenity. So again, the key here is physical access to the side of the property. Now, whether we make the property bigger, the front, this is right now, this is the front lot line. By buying the city property now, the front lot line is longer. That's a way to solve this problem, but the Lands and Resources Committee was not happy with the idea, nor was the Parks Recreation Advisory Committee. So give us a chance to resolve this, which is our proposed solution number 4, or adopt our proposed solution number 2 and cut this Gordian knot right now.
Follow up.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I maybe should have asked the applicant this is the applicant open to a way forward, should one exist, that would allow for a driveway to be built on the potentially transferring the property. Anyway, for a driveway to be built to access his home, as well as providing public access to the beach, continued public access to the water. I can try. You want me to try again?
Was that to me?
It was, but I was saying I should have maybe asked it to the applicant when it was up here, but now you're here, so.
Oh, well, that was thoughtful of you. Yeah, we've talked it over. He's willing to assure that there will be continued public access to the beach.
All right, I have Ms. Train, Mr. Bryson, and Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you both for being here. Is there any concern, given the previous interpretation of the lot line requirements, that if we did an easement, that wouldn't satisfy that? I just want to make sure that if we move forward with something tonight, you're not going to be back here again, and that we can actually, get the ball rolling.
I have been doing this for people for 27 years, and I have never guaranteed an outcome to any of my clients. But I think if you give us authority or give the staff authority to negotiate an easement or a sale, we can probably get it done without having to come back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Train. Mr. Bryson and
Madam Mayor, I was ready to make the motion. Sorry, Madam.
Mr. Bryson, let's hold off the motion. There's still questions for the testifier.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Me?
Ms. Gladysevsky and then Ms. Hale.
Quick question. Mr. Walsh, you just mentioned an option 4, and I didn't understand what your option 4 is. We got 1, 2, and 3 in the memo, and your proposal for 4 is what?
Defer this matter until the applicant can bring and win an appeal of the director's access ruling.
Oh.
or until CBJ staff can bring forward an amendment to the code that will make the lease easement option compliant.
Okay, thank you.
It's in my letter that I sent to everybody.
Any further questions for Mr. Walsh? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay. Questions to staff now, because I know there's a couple questions to staff. Ms. Glashow.
I'm going to ask the same question again because of Mr. Blydorn, just to make sure the concern from a lot of people, 50 people wrote in basically about public access to the beach. And we understand that it's not built now, but they were saying that we don't want to give up the possibility. So again, if we say to the applicant, enter into negotiations for an easement, will public access, or what do we have to say to ensure that public access is ensured?
Thank you. Well, if we enter into negotiations for an easement, the city and the assembly will continue to own the land, so access will be guaranteed as owners. If we move forward with the disposal of the property, at the time in which the property is conveyed, we will also record and plat an easement to the property which guarantees public access to the shoreline.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Any further questions? Ms. Hale.
Just a question for Mr. Attorney, on from the memo from Mr. Blydorn on July 5th, the final paragraph says Park CDD lands and the city attorney's office staff determined that an easement was problematic for following the land use code. Is that statement in part due to some changes in the way that we've been interpreting the code? Because I know there have been changes like variance, et cetera. And are you confident? I guess I can't ask you that. Is it in part due to changes in the way we've been interpreting things like variances in code?
No.
That was concise.
Let's pause for a second. Madam Clerk, Ms. Carthcat has her hand raised. Is there problems, technical problem somewhere? Or is that an inadvertent hand raising? I'll let you try and figure that out and we'll continue onward. Ms. Hale, any follow-up before I go on to Ms. Hughes Candies?
No.
Ms. Hughes Candies and
Um, thanks, Madam Mayor. There's a lot to dig through here, but the piece essentially has law weighed in on this, or is that through the CDD there's a problem with this?
Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, thank you. So the staff attorney that works with the Planning Commission and CDD, I know was working on this project a fair amount of time. And I recognize, and I think the director of CDD needs some recognition here that she was the one who identified that the current situation was non-conforming or likely non-conforming, and she identified a solution that made it such that the property owner could achieve their desires of having access and still preserving a public easement to the waterfront, and that was by disposing of the CBJ property and preserving a public easement. I recognize that did not clear the lands committee, and so this is that weird pickle that the assembly gets in where there's technically not a motion out of the committee. And so it's this uncomfortable question for the body. Is that even before this group or not? You know, the question, can 4 assembly members kill a topic? And so that's why we're here. That's why we're struggling, because there wasn't a clear recommendation from the lands committee.
Follow up.
Go ahead, Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. That's very helpful. So as an example, motion, I guess, would it be in order in that case if I wanted to send it back to the lands committee, because I feel like that should a motion, or is that what we just did recently? Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the Lands Committee solution was unavailing the last time it was there. So I think we're looking for either option 2, in which case we would negotiate with the applicant and try and bring something back. I think we've heard all the testimony. We understand the competing interests. That would be the do something option, or the, option 1 is the do nothing. And let this ship sail. So that's really what direction we're looking for.
All right, I have Mr. Smith, Ms. Treem, and then Ms. Hale.
Actually, I think my question's already been answered. Thank you.
Ms. Treem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for maybe Mr. Blyden or Mr. Watt. What would the difference in price be if we were selling an easement versus selling all the land, but keeping an easement? I guess where I'm going is I wouldn't want to require somebody to pay a lot more money to satisfy some convoluted section of code when the same outcome could be achieved if the price would be lower.
Mr. Watt?
Madam Mayor, I think the answer is if the assembly gives direction to negotiate with the applicant, we will come up with a legally permissible, most efficient solution possible.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Ms. Hale, I hope to God you have a motion. Oh, wait, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hale, do you have a question?
I actually just have a statement. It's just to clarify. I can't remember if it was Mr. Attorney that said that the Lands Committee had killed this, and indeed that happened, but it was not with a bang, but with a whimper. We could not agree. And so it's not that anybody set out with an intent to kill it. We just had these 2-2 votes, and then we tried it a different way and it still came out 2-2, and we couldn't move past it, and then we got stuck. So that's what happened. But I'm happy to hear a motion.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I move to allow staff to negotiate an easement with the applicant, and I'd like to speak to my motion.
Go ahead, Mr. Bryson.
Okay, I would like to correct my,
Amend.
I'd like to restate my motion, Madam Mayor. So let me borrow this.
Go ahead, Mr.
I move that staff enter into direct negotiations with the applicant, and I'd like to speak to my motion. Option number 2.
Let's see if there's any objection first. All right, go ahead, Mr.
All right. So I've made this statement a couple of times that staff is required by law to follow the letter of the law to the best of their ability. And it is our job to use common sense when we run into these convoluted moments. The law literally is preventing us from giving an answer to this applicant who is just desperately trying to make his home a little bit safer. That's where our responsibility of using common sense, looking past the black and white letter here. I was in the lands, so I absolutely have heard all of this information. We're stuck with just convoluted rules. That's why I believe negotiating so that they can find a simple path for this gentleman to build a driveway. Right now, there is no beach access. I read a lot of the comments that said, please preserve or keep the beach access. There's no beach access right now. And at the completion of this negotiation, the community will have beach access. Option number 2 is the most effective action that solves this problem for the applicant and for the community and for the city. It actually solves the problem for us. We don't have to bring it to another committee. We should grant this negotiation right now. Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Hale and then Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will I will point out the second paragraph of Mr. Blydorn's memo on packet page 88, where he talks about the city having ownership of many similar properties throughout the borough. And that's one of the things that has come up in conversations that I've had. There's lots and lots of little parcels of land that are right next to somebody else's that people would like to take possession of because it would make things better for them. It would improve their property. It would maybe get some weird corner out. And so there is a real concern that by granting this, that will be opening a floodgate to many more of these. There's a lot of these that come across the desk of lands and come across, come through the city. So there's that real concern. I sympathize with Mr. Paris. I've been out to the property after this came before lands. I actually drove out, actually before I drove past, and then afterwards I drove out and I got out and I kind of walked around to look at it. And there is a garage and there is a platform leading to the garage. So there is actually a possibility of actually parking there, but that would be expensive. But Mr. Paris knew that that existed before he bought this. I'm concerned about the precedent that this sets. I also would state that the city can provide access to the beach at any point in time. We just haven't done it yet. It hasn't risen on the in the list of priorities. I also feel a lot of sympathy for the applicant because we have different parts of the city sort of arguing against each other. You know, we have the lands committee, the lands department pointing out that it's really risky for us to set a precedent like this and start to let property go in such a way or grant easements. But we also have CDD and the attorney's office weighing in a different way. We have PRAC weighing in a certain way. I think that in the end, we probably the best thing to do is go with option 2. As Mr. Bryson suggests. I don't like this. I think it's very messy, and I'm really sorry it came all the way to the assembly. I'm actually really sorry it hit the lands committee in the way that it did. It was a very hard, gnarly problem to try to unknot, and it's even harder for us to do. So I will remove my objection.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Ms. Blaszewski and then Mr. Smith.
I just want to be sure that the motion is enter into direct negotiations with the applicant. It doesn't say whether the city would retain the land and the applicant would get an easement, or we would sell the land and the city would get an easement. And I'm super sorry the lands committee didn't have another go at this so you could get more details, because it's really hard for us to do at 10 o'clock at night with little information. No, I get it. I don't know which of those things is the best right now at 10 o'clock. I think the best is that the city keeps the land and gives them an easement, but I just don't know. So I trust that the city lands office and the city manager will figure that out and understand that the big concern from the PRAC and all these commenters is public access to the beach. And even if it's not built now, if we sell that property, then it's not city property anymore. So anyway, I'm just saying, I hope you understand the principle. I think you do, and that the negotiations follow in that vein.
Thank you, Ms. Blaszewski. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my question, I think, is similar to what Ms. Blaszewski was just saying, and that's, do we need to state in the motion that preserving public access to the beach needs to be part of the negotiations, or is that anyway?
It's understood.
Sorry.
Mr. Manager says it's understood.
Okay. And then I guess my second question is, where will this go after we negotiate? Is it going to come back to lands, or are we gonna do we have to direct it, or you guys will figure it out? Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, I think that is it. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any objection? Is that motion enough clarification for you, Mr.? Okay. With that being said, that motion passes.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, item D, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is L3 Harris request to lease city property at the JPD station for communications equipment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Who's getting this one? Mr. Watt.
In June 2022, CBJ received an application from L3 Harris to lease space at the Juneau Police Station located at 6255 Alloway Avenue. L3 Harris has submitted a letter from the FAA with their application stating that L3 Harris holds a contract with the Federal Aviation Administration. At this point in time, the application has been received. The next step in processing is for the Assembly to determine whether the proposal should be further considered, and if so, whether by direct negotiation with the original proposer or by competition after an invitation for further proposals. Upon direction by the Assembly, direction of the Assembly by motion, manager may commence negotiations for lease, sale, exchange, or other disposal of city and borough land. Lands, Housing and Economic Development Committee reviewed this request at its meeting on June 27 and provided a motion of support for leasing this property to L3 Harris. I recommend the Assembly pass a motion of support to work with L3 Harris as the original proposer in accordance with CBJ 5309260.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance? If not, we'll come back to the Assembly. Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly direct the manager to work with L3 Harris to lease space at JPD. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Watt.
I'm going to suggest a quick agenda change, and maybe if we move the staff report on Telephone Hill up in front of item E, we've got a couple people that have been.
We also have people on Zoom that probably want to testify to this next one.
Okay.
So, sorry. Item E, Mr. Attorney, are you taking that one?
Sure. Notice of appeals, Goldstein Improvement Company versus CBJ Finance Department Assessor Division. Greg Adler, on behalf of Goldstein Improvement Company, filed 2 notices of appeals regarding real property evaluations by the assessor from 2022 as follows. For one, property located, and these are both downtown, 110 Seward Street and the other one at 122 Front Street. State law provides that a taxpayer may appeal a Board of Equalization decision to Superior Court within 30 days of the Board of Equalization decision, not to the Assembly. Additionally, CBJ Charter has 2 provisions that may be relevant. Charter Section 3.16B, allowing appeals from boards created by the Assembly to the Assembly, and Charter Section 3.11, prohibiting the Assembly from giving orders on administrative matters to an employee of the manager. Prior to the expiration of the 30-day window to appeal the Board of Equalization decisions to Superior Court, the city clerk informed Mr. Adler that the Assembly would likely address the subject matter jurisdiction issues before deciding the merits of the appeal, and that may forego Mr. Adler his ability from timely appealing a Board of Equalization decision. I understand Mr. Adler did today appeal the Board of Equalization decisions to Superior Court. The Assembly needs to decide tonight if it is going to accept these appeals, and if so, is it going to appoint a presiding officer or a hearing officer? I recommend you accept the appeals for the limited purpose of receiving briefing from the parties and deciding if the Assembly has jurisdiction over the subject matter of these appeals and appointing a hearing officer.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this? Madam Clerk, please bring over Mr. Adler. Mr. Adler, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
My name is Greg Adler. I'm reside in Santa Monica, California. In my opinion, there are no jurisdictional issues. When I submitted the application, Beth was on the phone with the city attorney. He advised her to accept the 2 appeals pursuant to 3.16B. They attached 3.16B to both my receipts and my authorizations, which they stamped. I had no reason to believe that 3.16B didn't apply. And in fact, 3.16B is part of the charter, which is actually the constitution of the city of Juneau. And it would trump or take precedence over a state statute or a Juneau code. And once you do a notice of appeal, there are rules set forth in there to follow 01-50 of the code. And that has to do with the commencement of the action. And also, if you go to 01.50.030, the notice of appeal shall be liberally construed in order to preserve the rights of the appellant. So in my opinion, the rights of the appellant are supposed to be protected pursuant to the charter, which is the constitution of Juneau. It takes precedence over state statutes or even code sections from Juneau. And this is not a limited jurisdictional issue. The jurisdictional issues are resolved. The hearing officer, presiding officer, should be appointed to discuss the merits. And lastly, I want to consolidate all 6 of my appeals into the first 2.
All right, thank you, Mr. Adler. Any questions for Mr. Adler? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, and I do not see Mr. Geldof online. All right, so that brings it back to the assembly, but I imagine there's lots of questions first, so let's go start with questions first. Who has a question? Ms. Train.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can we really get around state law by putting something in our charter?
Mr. Attorney.
No, it's happened a few times, and there are provisions in our charter that are unconstitutional or illegal because of state law.
Who else has questions? Ms. Hale.
Mr. Attorney, did you say that Mr. Adler had appealed to Superior Court today?
Mr. Attorney.
Yes.
And I thought there was something in the memo that Mr. Adler had 30 days to make that appeal, but was that within the 30 days?
Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, thank you. It appears that today is likely the last day of his 30-day window, so it appears that it was timely filed.
Thank you.
Mike, I don't see any other questions, so I'll ask a question. Mr. Adler referred that the CBJ charter allowed any appeal to go for the assembly, but just looking at our little blurb here, it also was in the CBJ charter that prohibits the assembly from giving orders on administrative matters to an employee or the manager. So there, correct me if I'm wrong, but both sides are in our charter.
Correct. You are correct. There are 2 charter provisions that are likely relevant here that are possibly in conflict. In addition, there are state law provisions that are likely items that need to be briefed to decide if the assembly has the ability to even hear one of these appeals.
All right, thank you. Seeing no further questions, Ms. Gladishevsky, you have a motion.
Thank you. I do, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much. I think we should accept this appeal, but only get briefing about the jurisdictional issues. There are clearly, 3 conflicting things before we even get to the merits of the matter. So I think we should accept the appeal. If the city attorney can find a suitable hearing officer, send it to a hearing officer. And if not, that we could hear it ourselves. So that's the motion. I ask for unanimous consent.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gladysevsky. Any objection? Seeing none, and Mr. Attorney did nod his head when he said that he could find a suitable hearing officer. That motion is passed. All right, staff reports, Telephone Hill.
Pursuant to legislation passed by the state of Alaska this year, conveyance of Telephone Hill properties has begun. As part of that process, State Department of Transportation will first convey the property to the State Department of Natural Resources, which will then convey the property to CBJ. There are a number of residents on the hill that cooperatively lease the properties on a month-to-month basis. The state has determined that as part of the interdepartmental transfer, that it must terminate the existing lease. These notices went out on Friday, July 29. I've communicated to the neighborhood association that CBJ's goal is to have a public process on how to manage and redevelop the property, which is a tremendous opportunity for downtown Juneau, and to plan for a soft landing for the renters of the properties. The goal is to provide a seamless transition that will allow a continuance of occupancy in the short run. It's hard to imagine a scenario where tenants won't be able to stay for at least an additional 6 months, perhaps longer. I recommend this topic be forwarded to the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee for regular updates beginning with the August 8th, 2022 meeting. I also recommend the Assembly tonight verbally support the notion of a soft landing in our decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Any member of the public? Yes, we did have a couple members. Tony Tangs.
She wanted to speak first.
Okay, Shoshana Seligman.
Seligman, you got it.
Please state your name and the area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, Shoshana Seligman. I'm a downtown Juneau resident for over 30 years, and I live on Telephone Hill. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Assembly. Basically, what I want to speak to is the idea of the 6 months. So I know it's very exciting for the city to acquire the land, and there's this sense of, galloping horses out the gate, and it's very like dreamy for all of us. And there's a lot of ideas going on at Telephone Hill, and some of them are valid. And it's just, we are a tremendous resource, and it would be great if we felt that the city was really, really working with us. And 6 months is just, it's going to put us in winter, and the population on Telephone Hill now, as you all know, is a combination of seniors and people with disabilities, low income people, as well as legislative staff. So the idea of possibly giving us 6 months from the time that you've determined what to do with the land just seems more softer, so I spoke with a member of the legislative body after, who's been around the block around this, and he basically reassured me it would take a minimum of a year for the city to figure out through process and everything you need to go through to figure out what you want to do with the land. So if you could perhaps consider giving us the 6 months from whatever time that is, that you've determined what you want to do with the land, so that it could stay occupied and rent could still be coming in. Part of the reason I'm here today and not on the 8th is because I go to work early tomorrow morning, and sometimes I'm gone for 2 or 3 months. So I won't be able to come to the August 8th meetings. And also I saw that Telephone Hill is mentioned on the October 4th ballot, and it gives me great concern to vote, which I normally would, to, give the city more money when I'm not sure what the city is going to do with Telephone Hill.
All right,
And I
thank you.
understand
Any
you don't
questions
either.
For Ms. Seligman, is that right? Seligman?
Yeah.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you for coming tonight, Ms. Seligman. If we weren't able to give, because you're asking for I get what you're trying to ask us, to give you set times when we don't have a set time. What if we change the 6 to a 9, so that way it wouldn't put the end date minimum during the middle of winter? Because if we can't determine like when we're going to decide something, that would also be unfair to say 6 months from whenever we're able to figure out our decision. Could we just give you, would 9 months work, or 10 months? If we gave you a set amount of time so that everybody knew the defined amount of time, would that be acceptable to you? If there was like a set in stone, this is how much time this transition will take?
I don't think it's the set in stone that I'm really pointing to. It's more the let's get them out as soon as we can so that we can do whatever we want versus, hey, they're there and we can work with them while we figure this out. So it's not so much the whether it's 6 months or 8 months, although moving in winter, especially when a lot of us won't even be here for months at a time, is challenging at best.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Tangs? Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
I'm Tony Tangs. I was born in Juneau and in St. Anne's Hospital. Haven't made it very far in my life. Anyway, I live on Telephone Hill. I have lived there for 28 years. Some people like Jeff Brown have lived there, pushing 40 years. I'm concerned about this. I like the idea of a soft landing. I just, and I like, we all understand that we have to move, so you can develop the property. Housing is hard in Juneau with everybody doing Airbnbs with their places, and it's just plain hard. It makes sense for this to happen when you know what you're doing. I don't like to be kicked out. Right now, voting for this sales tax extension right now said to develop Telephone Hill. To me, what I'm seeing is bulldozers scraping our houses down. And that's the kind of development that you have visualized right now that the city would be, that I would be voting for. So I would be, normally I do support a new city hall and my tax dollars working for the public, but this gives me great pause. And it makes sense to have a vision for what you want and say, okay, I like the idea of a firm date instead of a hazy one, because with me, I like Telephone Hill. I'll stay on there until I have to go. But if it's all hazy, I'm going to try to stay there. I don't want to get kicked out in the middle of winter. I'd like you to, I don't think you have to, I think it's brutal to the point of being cruel to have to visualize in such a stupid fashion, to scrape everything off before you can visualize something that you want to do with it. I think you can actually visualize this, what you want to do, give us a notice, and then we can go forward.
All right, thank you for your testimony. You're out of time. Any questions for Mr. Tangs? Mr. Smith and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Tanks. Do you know how many people live on Telephone Hill?
Yes, there are 13 households between apartments and homes. I don't know the full number. Some of them have 3 people, 3 living in a household. It's not a great number, but it's still an entire neighborhood.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Tony, for coming tonight, and Shosh. Mr. Tangs, I don't see anything in what Mr. Manager has written or anything in what I've heard, even within the 1% for sales tax, that's talking about bulldozing the property before we even know what's going to happen. And I just wonder if you could clarify, where you have that impression, because I'm, as the chair of the Lands Committee, and this is where this will, the updates will be landing. I certainly don't have that impression at all. And I also don't have that impression in terms of the way the city operates. So I just, because we have long public processes. So I just wonder if you have that impression, where it came from, and if there's anything that we can do, and part of what we're doing here is we really want to hear from people, but we also want to assure people that yes, indeed, we want that soft landing. And I think it probably will be longer than 6 months, but we're not in a business to say exactly when, because none of us know. So that's my question or assurance, I guess.
To me, getting everybody out of there indicates you want them emptied for a reason. Why? What usually happens when people get that's, I mean, there's a long history behind understanding what happens when you want to develop things, when you kick people out of old buildings, what happens? It's really, I mean, I didn't figure this out with an Ouija board.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony. So we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Glaszewski.
You, Madam Mayor. I would move that as this is forward to the Lands Committee and the motion about soft landing, just to be clear, I don't that the city would not try to evict people prior to knowing what it was going to do. The 6 month timeline is just to say it will be at least 6 months, not that it will be 6 months and then you'll have to leave and the houses are going to be empty and we're going to scrape it. Just a guarantee that there's 9 months, I would say, nothing's going to happen before 9 months. It's probably, frankly, years before we figure out what's going to do. But I guess the motion is that the residents be assured that they're not going to be evicted prior to the city knowing what it's going to do with the land. Not going to scrape it first and have it sit there and just sit there until we figure it out. So it's at least 9 months before that is going to happen. And as I said, probably longer. So I've made a very complicated motion now.
Mr. Tang, you can't speak in
Yeah.
public testimony.
I just want to, if someone can help, that's the motion. The sense of the motion is the residents be assured that they're not going to be evicted until the city has plans to do something with Telephone Hill.
Ms. Treem and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree that it's probably a long time until we are actually doing anything up there, but I appreciate our public testifiers' concerns, and I feel really strongly that our soft landing should probably begin when those plans are made. I really, yeah, I guess I know this is going to come back to us many, many times. Other people in the assembly might feel differently, but I would say start that soft landing countdown when we have plans, just to give people as much notice as possible, because it's a pretty big deal to kick somebody out of the home they've lived in for decades. So as much time as possible, I wouldn't start the soft landing clock until we are well on our way to actually doing something on Telephone Hill.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Ms. Hale and Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. And I think most, if not all, of the residents of Telephone Hill are friends and acquaintances of mine for many, many years. I think it's important, but that said, I think it's important that indeed, I think it's going to be a long time before we do anything, but we have to be careful with how we characterize, until we know, well, what is what we know. We have the blueprint downtown to work with. We have a lot of other groups of people to work with. We have the residents of Telephone Hill to work with, because they probably also have ideas about what would work there. They've lived there for a very long time. In my mind, I think that Mr. Manager said for at least an additional 6 months, perhaps longer. I think we could certainly say for at least an additional 9 months, perhaps longer, but I wouldn't want to try to characterize sort of where the clock starts or anything too specifically, because we're right at the very beginning of this process. I think I definitely want to assure the residents of Telephone Hill that they're going to know there's going to be lots of lead time. It's a very public process and everything we do is very public. I also would say that those leases have been month-to-month leases for 40 years. So the handwriting's always been on the wall. We've always known that those are temporary leases. And everybody living there has always known that. And that's just been part of the deal with the state. So I think that we have that situation, and we have people who have lived there for a long time, indeed people who have special needs, and they have to be very carefully taken care of, and those needs considered. But I guess this was not unforeseen. It just took a long time to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know that we're probably not addressing deeper dive questions, but there are real questions about, are we going to take on a property manager, or is the CBJ now going to be a landlord? So we have to not only solve and come up with some information as a process to help the residents of the place, but to also give CBJ a plan on how we're going to properly handle this property, because right now I don't believe the CBJ has residential property as a landlord, and we got to figure some details out. So I know that the time is going to be great. And the one thing that I will say to the people that are concerned at Telephone Hill is that I completely understand how uncertainty you were just given. You have to move at some point, and the uncertainty's got to be the toughest component of that. And so I will at least offer my apologies that we couldn't be more like, we're going to do this in 3 months, this in 6 months, this in a year. So for the uncertainty component of it, you have my greatest sympathies on that, because I don't know if there's anything that we can do to change it. That's my statement. Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Manager, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to be clear. It's the state that put out the eviction notices, not CBJ. We're still unclear on when we'll receive the property. We're trying to get clarity on that. So the Transportation Department is conveying it to Natural Resources, and it's transportation that has noticed the residents. We're hoping to find a way to get a seamless transition where we can extend a lease. There are so many issues. We've started reading the file. We'll be at Lands Committee with a general process flow on how we'll consider a redevelopment plan, and that kind of thing. And I've been frank with a number of people that I've talked to on the Hill. And I've said, we're the city, we just don't move that fast. I can't imagine that it's going to go that fast. But if you need certainty, start looking. Right. But if you're okay hanging on, it could be a long time, and hang on, and that's okay too. And there's just going to be a lot of issues that we're going to have to work through. So I would, I think the Assembly has the support of the idea of the soft landing, and we'll have it at the Lands Committee. And there's a lot of work and a lot of process to come.
Let me just
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Nope, we have Mr. Smith in front.
clarify the motion.
Okay, let me ask the question. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd imagine that maximizing, well, maybe not, but I'd think that maximizing occupancy or, residential spaces for people to live in is probably, it's probably a goal or something we're considering, right? Or not. Do we want people to stay there as long as possible or not, I guess?
I will clarify.
Through the mayor. I think as a new property owner, we want to do our due diligence. So, some of the things that I want to do as an impending new property owner is, have our fire marshal take a look up there, and have our building code people take a look and make sure that, that the buildings are sufficiently maintained to be protective of people's health and safety. I don't think it's to anybody's benefit to have empty buildings. We don't want to be the owners of blighted properties or properties where people move in or squat. I think we do have a complicated transition of the current paradigm to whatever plan we adopt. And the testifier noted that an obvious concept that we're going to entertain is a big redevelopment of the site. One of the things we'll have to figure out is, if we're going to go after that, we need to do a hazardous materials inventory and figure out if there's asbestos or lead paint or oil tanks. I mean, we have a ton of things that we need to do. This is going to be at Lands Committee regularly for some time to come. And we probably have quite honestly, we probably have a time trap. So if DOT has notified the residents that they have 30 days, and we don't know when DNR is going to convey the property to us. I'm not even entirely certain what happens if there's a hole in there, but I think what I had hoped for tonight, and I think you're doing that, is convey a sense to the neighborhood that we want to work with the neighborhood and we want to have a seamless transition, and we're not stampeding. We don't have a plan yet.
All right, thank you, Mr. Watt. Mr.
Can I-
Smith, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Watt. I guess just as I've been thinking about this a little bit, I know there's a lot of uncertainty and things, but if at all possible, if we can, have some principles like, again, we know housing is an issue. So hopefully like providing more residential space for as long as possible, giving the people a known and sufficient amount of time before, okay.
We'll clarify.
Okay, I'll finish though. Thanks. And then the other would just be like provide like over and above like public awareness type of things. And I'm sure you're thinking of this, but I just wanted to just put it out there. And then the other is hopefully, if need be, provide people resources for helping them find other housing or whatever, just because as Ms. Stream said, having people leave a home they left for decades is pretty, rough. So anyway, those would just be a few things. And I think, I imagine you're already thinking about those, and maybe Mr. Gladishevsky will scam in the motion, but just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, Ms. Gladishevsky.
Sure, just to clarify that the soft landing is that no one will be noticed to move out for at least 9 months. Frankly, that's probably way short, but that seems you don't have to worry about that for 9 months. The policy is the city is not going to come in and evict people and scrape the land and have it sit there. You will be afforded as long as possible and at least 4 months notice from when the city finally figures out what it's going to do. So that's the first definition of soft landing. That's the motion now, just so you know.
Any objection? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just want to run it by staff to see, is that does that work?
I just don't want to overpromise anything. We've barely begun to understand the property. I understand from the leaders of the neighborhood association, there's 17 people that live there. You'll also recall that you got a letter some months ago from the fund advisors at the Community Foundation expressing interest in participating in redevelopment of the property to support the capital. It's going to be complicated. I think I'm reluctant to overpromise anything about a property that I know a little bit about, but really only became an immediate issue on Thursday afternoon.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I would just say that I think rather than having super specific motion, I do think it's too soon to be making motions that are, I think the general will of the assembly has been expressed, and I think Mr. Watt would have to affirm this, but I think that staff takes that yes, we want a soft landing, and I don't think we need to nail into definition. I do think it's too soon. I think we've expressed
You
that.
amending the motion? Is that an amendment to the motion?
I would amend it to make it softer. I would, what did they request? I would request that, I would endorse the concept of a soft landing in all decision making to come, with the understanding that we are only just getting started, and ask for unanimous consent.
Right, Ms. Gladys.
I object. I think that is super vague, and what the manager just said would make me nervous if I lived on Telephone Hill, because it sounds like I'm not sure, we can't promise, we might send you what. This at least gives people notice that they're going to at least have 4 months notice. It won't be, it at least won't be before 9 months from now. And no one has an intention to kick them out before we know what we're going to do. I think those are 3 principles that we should let them know now, as opposed to soft landing, we promise. But then if the manager decides in 6 months he needs to evict people, we might do that. I just think that's.
Ms. Hale, and then.
For the record, I think we would have some say in that. I don't think the manager could unilaterally evict people.
Okay, Ms. Hale, and then I can't, Ms. Freeman, you had your hand up. Okay, Ms. Hale and then Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support what Ms. Uskandis is saying, and I understand where Ms. Gladys is coming from. I do worry about being so specific at this point when we know so little, and I think that Ms. Uskandis is right. We'll be involved at every step of the way. This is going to be back and back and back before the Lands Committee. So it's not like it's going to surprise any of us, and everything we do is done in public. I think, and we can get more specific soon, but just having a few days to talk about it and this or think about it, and this being the first time we've talked about it, I do worry about that kind of specificity. And I will point out that there has been a month-to-month lease, and I appreciate what Mr. Manager said about not getting into some sort of weird hole, and I'm sure Mr. Manager is working very hard with the state to try to prevent that. But I'm hoping that, and I'm hoping also that some of that specificity can come through the committee to the assembly, where we do all some of that trying to figure out things at the committee level then right here.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Ms. Stream.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy with specifying 9 months in Ms. Gladys motion, but the 4 months after we decide is a little iffy, because I'm not sure what deciding means, and I'm worried that we're not going to remember the motion that we made at 10:35 p.m. like a year from now or whatever. So I guess I'm happy with saying now that we could guarantee 9 months, but the 4-month part, I'm not, I don't think I'm on board with right now.
All right, I'll jump in too. I support Ms. Uskandis. I'm sorry for the uncertainty for the homeowners, but at the same time, we don't even own the property yet. Could be 3 or 4, 5, 6 months before we even get the property. So I think we need to keep it vague just so we can send it to Lands and Housing and Economic Development. And it's going to take a process. And like Ms. Hale keeps saying, you guys can certainly follow the process, and hopefully staff will keep you informed along the way. So I would support Ms. Uskandis' motion. All right, we have a motion on the floor and we have objection. Madam Clerk, are you clear on the amendment?
So the amendment, if I'm possibly clear, is to endorse the concept of soft landing, but to remove the 9-month and 4 months timeframes. Is that accurate, Ms. Uskandis?
Madam Clerk, the amendment is to endorse the concept of soft landing, direct staff to keep bringing it back before us and to communicate with the residents, but to keep it vague, no specificity. Remove all specificity.
Okay, so for Ms. Uskandis' amendment, Ms. Uskandis. Mr. Smith,
Oh,
Ms. Treem,
Yes.
Ms. Wall,
Yes.
Ms. Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Ms. Kladaszewski,
No.
and Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion carries 6 yeas, 2 nays. And, oh, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I'll let you go on to the main motion if you wish.
To the main motion as amended. Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. All right, for the assembly reports, we're going to skip them. Is there any continuation of public process on non-agenda items? Since you're only 2 public left, do you want to talk on anything that we didn't talk about tonight? No. So, all right, with that, we will, Ms. Treem, will you bring us into executive session?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the assembly recess into executive session to discuss matters which may tend to negatively impact the finances of the municipality, specifically an update on labor negotiations. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection from the public? Any, so moved. We're in executive session and Ms. Wall is removing herself from her because of her conflict. So let's 2 minutes, if anybody has to use the restroom.
And Madam Mayor, just to verify with the people on Zoom that we are ending the public broadcast of the meeting at this time. Is that accurate? Madam Mayor? Did you hear me? That we are ending the Zoom public broadcast at this time. Is that accurate? Thank you.